Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana walked slowly down the street, deeply and eagerly, breathing in the first gusts of the light spring breeze. The wind, as if rejoicing with the girl, played merrily with her golden brown curls, each time caressing her pale, gaunt young face. At last, thought the girl, I can't believe it. I can breathe freely again, walk freely, and no longer need to go to bed after bedtime. This is the greatest happiness of man, freedom. Adriana had the right to say that because she had been released from prison only a few days ago. Adriana was lucky, having served 3 years out of 5. Adriana was under the amnesty program and received a legal pardon. However, despite this, it was very hard for the girl, especially at first. Constant intimidation and indecent proposals from the side, their exorbitantly accurate escort named James, made Adriana's life on the zone almost unbearable. Every now and then James caught up with Adriana, from the morning roll call in the yard of the colony to the shrill signal of the end of the work shift in the local sewing shop. The man, like a mountain, piled all his fat on the small, fragile Adriana, and pressing her as hard as he could against the dirty wall, so that the girl could not move, began to whisper passionately in her ear. Adriana, don't be silly. What do you care? Would it be a waste of you? The escort's hands, meanwhile, shamelessly tried to feel the girl's legs. James' thick, sticky fingers were trying to get under the edge of Adriana's tight, dark blue work skirt. The young prisoner, realizing that she could not escape from the clutches of this beast, crossed her sharp knees and turned her face to the wall. Sometimes Adriana felt as if he would crush her, or that she would accidentally break her neck, trying to dodge his disgusting, slobbering kisses. I've had my eye on you for a long time, since day one. The huge man continued to confess his feelings. James was only 32, but because of a lot of extra weight, he looked much older and unpleasant. You see such a beautiful girl, but in our hole. Come on, say something, at least give me a word of affection. Adriana persisted in her silence until James's patience began to fray at the seams. You shouldn't. You're wasting your breath, girl. His lustful moans became more and more filled with unkind growls. Do you think you're special or something? You think you're going to get hit on just because you have a pretty face. I'll have you in the SHU, you little bitch. You'll be eating out of the same bowl as the cockroaches. You'll do all your time from call to call. No parole for you, you understand me? Finally, Adriana looked at him in her indifferent, light green eyes. There was nothing but contempt and absolute steadfastness in her own convictions. It's up to you, guard, Adriana said calmly, but it is better to sleep with cockroaches and to choke on breadcrumbs instead of porridge than to lie in the same bed with you, Mr. James. The guardsman's cheeks began to shake like jelly in an open can of stew, and the lumpy, uneven skin on his face was covered with red spots. James pounded the girl with his huge fist under her breath and hissed angrily as Adriana tried to suck in air noisily, at the same time bending in half from the pain that pierced her stomach and chest. Bold, huh? But nothing, we'll see how soon you sing differently when I send the right people to you. Look, Adriana, look at me. James forcefully grabbed Adriana by the hair and jerked her head up, forcing her to look directly into his hateful, almost colorless eyes. A triumphant smile played on his lips, thin and scarlet like earthworms. I'm going to break you, you slaughtered goat. You'll be begging for mercy when I come to you in the evenings. But I'm not going to stop, no. We're going to have a lot of fun, believe me. James stuck out his long, thick tongue and swiped it across the girl's neck, so that Adriana wanted to scream in the sense of disgust and humiliation. Unfortunately, Adriana realized that her screams and attempts to draw the attention of her superiors to the situation might not serve her well, making her situation in the colony worse. Instead, she bit her knuckles with all her might and sobbed silently, putting all her resentment and pain into those choking sounds. The next few weeks, the girl had to spend in unaccountable fear for her life. Adriana forever remembered what it tasted like, this terrible feeling, when instead of falling into a deep and empty sleep, after a hard shift at work, she was forced to be on guard all the time. Every now and then, listening to every suspicious rustle that came from her cellmates. James, of course, did not stop all this time to mock the girl, then forced the prison cook to put a couple of nails in her liquid porridge at lunch for a sweet, as the disgusting guard later put it, then constantly watched for the slightest violation of the prisoner Adriana, discipline. All hoped thus to coerce her into intimacy, or to send her to the punishment cell. But Adriana was also far from stupid. The colony had quickly taught her to keep her eyes open, and not to let those who wanted to take advantage of what little Adriana still had left of her free life. In the 3 years she spent in prison, Miranda, or Adriana as almost everyone from her parents to friends to acquaintances called her, matured very quickly. Life behind barbed wire in some ways made the girl wiser, and at the same time taught her almost Christian humility. Not so long ago, just before her release, Adriana turned 24, but she felt as if she had lived her whole life behind bars. In the end, the fate of the fat guard was decided by chance. One day, a special squad of fighters and internal security officers raided the colony. That's when it turned out that in addition to an unhealthy love for young prisoners, James had much more serious sins. It turned out that for a long time he had been working for a major criminal authority held in another prison. This authority managed to establish a very profitable business within the walls of the colony, supplied prisoners illegal substances, as well as deliver to them illegal, in local places, cell phones, so that women could contact the outside world, or, on the contrary, fool simple-minded citizens, turning all the known schemes of fraud. The most interesting thing was that James organized his dirty deeds with the help of the head of the colony, so that in the end they were taken away from there together, in the same service truck. After that, Adriana was able to breathe a little freer. A couple of days later, they were introduced to the new head of the colony, Michael, thanks to whom the girl's life during the rest of the term became a little easier. The fact that Adriana was a nurse by the nature of her professional activity. The new owner of the prison suffered from a rare disease in which injections had to be given every day. Against this background, she and the prisoner met, and Charles turned out to be an extremely decent man. He was in his early 60s. He never molested the girl. On the contrary, he treated her with due understanding and even sympathized with her difficult fate. "Miranda, according to your file, you worked as a nurse in the past, right? Isn't that right?" Michael asked her once, summoning her individually to his office. "That's right, Chief." Adriana answered in a practiced tone, but she was a little out of breath. What would the new commander demand of her? Charles looked carefully at the girl, and then suddenly for her, embarrassedly lowered his gaze. "Adriana, I have a favor to ask of you." The man began. Adriana felt her feet grow cold. "Don't get me wrong," he continued in a slightly agitated voice. "You see, I've suffered from a rare form of gout all my life. With my diagnosis, I have to inject myself with the drug every single day. You know, in this line of work, that's a little difficult, considering what chatty types the doctors here are, even after this James thing. Anyway, I can't give myself an injection, and the local nurse, Clara, is sticking a needle in my soft spot like she's cutting a pig in her village. For God's sake. Adriana could hardly contain her relief and laughter, and she thought she was going to be harassed again with some vulgar nonsense. And here she was. "Yes, I've heard that Clara has a heavy hand," she said with a slight smile. "But she's a professional of the highest caliber, having worked in the village paramedic station for 5 years. The girl tried to stand up for her colleague. "It's obvious that she worked in the township." Michael nodded. "In general, I need a nurse who will give me medicines normally and will not talk about anything in front of strangers. Somehow, I think you, Miranda, are the best person for this role. I have read the circumstances of your story and realize you are here more out of your own stupidity and naivety than for an actual crime. I'm not going to offer you anything illegal or indecent, just a purely medical request." The girl lowered her gaze in embarrassment, her cheeks covered with an embarrassed blush. "Of course, sir, the head of the colony. I will do whatever it takes from me to ensure your health. After all, it is my profession. No need for that." The man waved his hand at her. Michael hesitated for a moment and then said, looking out the window, "I heard how that James was mocking you here. It's all right, Miranda. He's going to have to experience all the delights of the socializing he forced on himself and the other girls. He'll answer for everything, you bastard." Adriana hesitantly raised her eyes to the colony chief, then spoke briefly. "Adriana." "What?" Michael didn't understand. "Call me Adriana. Everyone does that," the girl explained, smiling. Charles smiled warmly and paternally at the young prisoner. Since that day, Adriana was able to realize at least some of her medical potential, which, however, was very dissatisfied with the staff nurse Clara and to feel not so useless as it was before. The girl gave injections to the head of the colony and kept silent, keeping the details of their conversations in those sensitive moments under a complete ban. Michael was a widower who had lost his entire family in a plane crash, including his young 16-year-old daughter Kelly, whom he missed dearly. Perhaps Adriana reminded him of his untimely departed daughter. The girl did not know exactly, but Charles was kind to her, and in due time, when the order of general amnesty was announced, in time to hustle, providing Adriana the opportunity to get out early in the same year. In addition, Michael wrote to one of his old acquaintances, the owner of an Apasian cafe in the center of the city, and he took Adriana in as a cleaner after her release. The girl needed the job very much, so Adriana never tired of thanking the head of the colony, promising that she would definitely write him a letter after she settled down on the outside. Come on, really. I'd be glad to help you get a job as a nurse, but with your article, you can't. Not for the next couple years anyway." "That's okay," the young woman answered him. "You've already done so much for me. I'd, on the contrary, feel uncomfortable that you vouch for me both to the state and to the director of this cafe. Mason is a good man, calm. You cannot be afraid of him." Michael assured her. He and I ate a lot of salt together in his time in the service. But he decided to go into business, and Charles waved his hands eloquently. "Looking after this henhouse, as you see." He laughed unkindly. "But nothing in such work, as they say, is also necessary." Charles and Adriana parted very well, even hugging each other goodbye. The girl had never thought that she would miss the head of the colony. But she did. Deep down, Adriana was still very kind and romantic. She was just unlucky to get into a bad situation and pay with her own years of life for someone else's sins. When Adriana was 21 years old and she had just got a job in a good private clinic as a nurse, a young and promising surgeon who worked in the same medical center began to show interest in her. Ericles, that was the name of this young guy, was tall, good-looking, and very charming. He had recently turned 26, and he was considered a real star of the clinic at that time. Of course, the young nurse was flattered by the attention of such a spectacular young man, as Ericles was, and a very stormy romance quickly began between them. Before Adriana knew it, they had gone from carefree conversations over coffee in the residence room to long and beautiful dates under the full moon. Then life seemed truly magical and filled with that special magic and beauty that people see only when they are in love and experiencing the joy of reciprocal feelings. Ericles did have romantic feelings for the girl at first. At some point he even decided to tell her parents about it and was determined to marry Adriana. But then, everything suddenly went wrong. The guy became addicted to gambling, especially cards, and began to lose larger and larger sums of money. Of course, the bride, seeing all this, and the prospect to which her lover was inevitably approaching, tried to somehow talk to him to reason, but all was in vain. Ericles, you should finally understand. Adriana tried to inspire the guy when he once again was going to go with friends to the underground parties, where it was supposed to be a big card tournament with the best players from all over the state. Those cards won't do you any good. I mean, look how many people's lives are literally ruined by this stuff. And you, by the way, are a surgeon. You need to always stay with a sober head and a cold heart. You are saving people's lives, and there will probably be booze, and maybe something even worse. The guy smiled indulgently in response, hugging his beloved by the shoulders. You always dramatize everything. What maimed lives? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? This is a normal professional poker tournament, the same as a normal sport, you know? Like chess. There's a regional swimming competition, a regional running competition. I don't know, so here it's a regional card game tournament. And then it's fair. If I can hold out and beat everybody, I win so much money. You always wanted the most beautiful wedding, remember? Ericles jabbed into the girl's hair and kissed her tenderly. Yes, but... Adriana tried to object. But here, the groom interrupted her. You and I will play such a wedding. Such a holiday will be organized on their own means that even my parents will remember later. How it is, they refused to help their son, who was a loser, and he instead of it, the best day in their lives, managed to organize. They refused to help their son because he spends all his earnings on whiskey and poker. Adriana grumbled, trying to get out from under her fiancé's arm. I don't approve of it anyway, Ericles. They must be professional cheats, and you're going in there as if nothing had happened, like a rabbit to a boa constrictor. A shadow of impatience and irritation ran across her lover's face. He was clearly unpleasant to this conversation, and therefore the young man tried to end it as quickly as possible. Everyone closed the subject. It's annoying, for God's sake. He threw his friend over his shoulder, at the same time throwing on an expensive Italian jacket made of fine leather. Ericles was a well-to-do guy and could afford to buy such things. You're itching like my grandmother, honestly. She also tried to raise me to be a proper boy, but I'm a grown man and I won't let women push me around, understand? I'm going to the poker game. I'll be late. Go to bed without me. Having said so, Ericles picked up his gloves and a small leather bag and then disappeared through the doorway, leaving Adriana all alone in the empty apartment. They then decided to try to live together before the wedding, and rented with their own money a small apartment, which at that time had almost no belongings. The girl, not thinking long, went that evening to her home, where she was waiting for her loving father and mother, to whom she could tell absolutely everything. How could it be, my daughter? Nancy was surprised at her daughter's story. He's an addict, isn't he? How are you going to live with him when he's already losing all his money? He's gonna screw you over too. But I love him very much, Mom. Objected to this daughter. Besides, Irakli says that cards are also a kind of sport. So I've come to consult him. What should I do now? He says that he wants to earn money for our wedding, but I still have doubts. When he talks about his poker, his eyes light up weirdly. He's obsessed with cards. You're Irakli. That's why his eyes light up, said Benjamin Vitalievich, driving out to his daughter from the next room in his wheelchair. Exactly like Pushkin's, remember? 3-7 ace. The man made deliberately scary eyes and laughed good-naturedly. He loved his daughter very much. Don't mention the Queen of Spades in vain, Benjamin, please, Adriana's mother begged. The girl came to us for advice, and you're always joking. No, where am I? I've already made up my mind. Father said guiltily, pointing at his immobile legs. I just want to say something, Adriana. You don't need a fiancé who, except for his poker, can't see anything further than his own nose. He's a surgeon, cutting people up. Daddy, Adriana exclaimed reproachfully. Well, what did I say? You did. He calmly objected, raising his hand. After all, the lives of other people depend on his hands. And what will he do if all his thoughts instead of surgery will become twists and turns and card combinations? What will he cure? To this, their daughter had nothing to say. She only sighed sadly. That's what I'm telling him, Dad. To do such a job every day, to take such responsibility, and in the evening to go to these underground competitions. His hands are already starting to shake during surgery. A nurse told me she assisted him the other day. She said, do you have any idea what that might be about? I mean, you guys are kind of like bride and groom now. Well, what did you say? The mother asked worriedly. What would I say? If the hospital finds out that he is a gambler, he will be fired immediately. No one will understand whether it's a sport or not. I realize that myself. If you understand it, tell your senior before it's too late. Benjamin's advice. This is not a joke, Miranda. This is getting very serious. Adriana could not answer her father that she could never betray Irakli. After all, they were only going to be married in 6 months. How could she destroy their future happiness with her own hands? But happiness? Considering what their daily routine was beginning to turn into, where Adriana just waited for her fiancé to come home late, while he got drunk and lost all their already small money in cards. In the end, just as the nurse's father had said, things did indeed end badly. Except not for Irakli, but for Adriana. It so happened that the girl's fiancé made a lot of card debts, and to pay them off, he began to slowly pull up special drugs from the group to be accounted for. Selling potent drugs to fans of a quick high, the young man received money for them, some of which went to pay debts, and part of which went to new bets. Naturally, it was not possible to keep such a disappearance secret for a long time. And in a couple of weeks, the cash register was questioned by the director of the clinic. Adriana was on shift every time when the next batch of medicines disappeared, and she alone had the key to the box with them. The girl didn't even suspect that Iraklius, talking to her, stealing the key from her, and taking another package for himself. It seemed that he deliberately framed the girl, but was able to justify his behavior, allegedly caring about their future together. I can't believe this. You took the keys to the box from me without my knowledge. Adriana was indignant. You call that trust? Irakli, how could you? Calm down. Irakli grabbed the girl's hands and immediately licked his lips, dry from excitement. The surgeon's eyes ran back and forth. He tried not to look at his beloved. Noticing how pale the young man's skin was, Adriana couldn't help but ask, "Heraclius, have you been taking something? You're so pale, and your behavior is strange. Shut up!" He bellowed at her, but immediately began to apologize. I'm sorry, dear Adriana. Just hear me out now, okay? I did everything just so that we could have our own money, and for the wedding, and in general, so that we wouldn't depend on our parents for anything. But stealing expensive drugs, even illegal ones, is not the way. Adriana could barely keep herself from screaming in fear. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you when they find out? Not only will you lose your job, but you'll go to jail. With difficulty, the nurse finished. At that moment, on the lips of her fiancé, a wicked smile played on his lips. Heraclius could hardly keep the focus of his attention on Adriana. The girl realized that her lover was under the influence of some intoxicating substance. "What have you done?" she said slowly. "Adriana, listen to me." The groom began confusedly. "You must now go to the director of the clinic and confess to him that it was you who took those drugs. Do you understand?" "What? Are you out of your mind?" Adriana's eyes instantly widened in horror. "Do you realize what you're offering me right now?" The surgeon nodded confidently in response. "Adriana, understand. It's the best thing to do, the best thing for everyone." "For whom for everyone?" "For you." Almost crying, his fiancée asked him, "Don't you understand, silly? I can't go to prison." Belittling, looked at her ironically. "I have parents with a reputation, a career after all. I care about our future." "You're lying." "You care about yourself, Heraclius, and no one else." Swallowing tears, Adriana said, "I can't believe that I could trust you so much." In response, the surgeon hugged the girl, despite her attempts to pull away, and held his bride tightly to himself. "I love you, Adriana. I'll wait until you get out of jail. I won't go anywhere. And then we'll get married right away." "How's that for a plan? You're just a nurse. What are they going to do to you?" "My future will be ruined, and then I won't be able to provide for us. You'll serve another year, and then you'll get a job as a nurse. You won't have to work at all for a few years. I'll marry you, and you'll give birth to children at once. We'll bring them up, and no one will ever know about it." Adriana began to have doubts. Maybe she really should have taken all the blame? If Heraclius was right, she would lose much less than he did. But when the girl is released, a married, quiet life immediately awaits her. "What about your poker? What about your damn cards, because of which you're setting me up like this?" Adriana looked resolutely into Heraclius' eyes, expecting to hear the truth. The young man slowly pulled away from Adriana and said deliberately without looking her in the eyes, "Poker? What about poker?" "I'll give it up. I've already given it up. There will be no more cards, and I will not come close to them. I've just about paid off the bosses who sponsored me in the tournament. To hell with that. Just confess everything for God's sake." Surgeon suddenly for the girl fell to his knees in front of her, and almost crying, began to assure her of his endless love for her. "I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you." Practically sobbing surgeon, hugging the bride's knees. "As you go out, so we'll sign, I swear to you, whatever you want." In the end, he still managed to persuade the gullible girl to take the crime on himself, promising her a wedding and a wonderful new life in another city. Adriana, exhausted by the variety of feelings, out of naivety, and because she still loved her foolish fiancé, still agreed. To Miranda's amazement, the court sentenced her to 5 years for stealing and distributing illegal drugs. Heraclius, who was present at the trial, silently thanked Adriana with one eye. At the same time, Nancy and her husband nearly had a heart attack. The mother sobbed, blaming the groom, and lamented about the future of her innocently ruined daughter. Adriana's father, however, did not utter a single word during the entire trial, beyond what was required of him as a witness. He steadfastly endured his daughter's arrest, and only then, a month later, when Adriana was already in the colony, her mother wrote her that Benjamin was very seriously ill. His condition worsened due to the stress suffered during the investigation of the girl. So now the doctors are not going to make any prognosis about him. Everything will depend on you. The doctor spread his hands. If you can get expensive Swiss drugs for the father, then there is still a chance that he can be returned to the previous level of health. If not, alas, we have done all we can. It was worth giving Heraclius credit. During the whole time Adriana was serving his sentence, the young man wrote her several big touching letters instead of him, and even came to visit her 3 times. However, when released, the girl faced the first unpleasant behavior of her fiancé. He did not meet her from the colony. Adriana strictly forbade her parents to meet her, saying that I would take a cab myself. The girl did not want her father and mother to see the state in which she was leaving the prison, and how the heavy iron gates with barbed wire closed behind her. But she still hoped for Heracles' help, and there was nothing. Strange, Adriana thought, and hurriedly dialed the number of her beloved on her cell phone. It had been returned to her with her things, and Nancy had carefully put a couple of dollars into the phone's account so that her daughter could call when she was free and warn them that she was on her way home. However, only long beeps were heard in the receiver. After a few minutes of unsuccessful calls, the girl waved goodbye and ordered a cab and went straight home. She thought that Heracles must be busy, is on surgery, or solving some important issues at a meeting at the clinic. The young man confessed that as soon as he finally stopped playing cards, his life began to rapidly return to its former successful course. So she only had to leave the walls of the prison, as they would be together again. Trusting her fiancé, the girl decided not to bother him for a while. Especially, he would probably have her number highlighted, and he himself would call her back as soon as he was free. Thinking about the latter, Adriana smiled involuntarily, but the smile was bitter and faded. Freedom. He was free all this time, but I wasn't. I could have answered sooner. With a slight resentment, thought the girl, then switched to thoughts of her own family. At home she was welcomed warmly and lovingly. Her mother baked hot puffed pies with cheese and herbs. Adriana had loved them since childhood. Her father lay in his room and was practically unresponsive. Speaking of it, Nancy involuntarily brushed away a tear. He was like that almost as soon as you were taken away. Wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, the woman said, "The doctors say his stroke has had complications, complete paralysis of the body. He can still be restored to his former state, but the drugs they prescribed for him are very expensive. They have to be ordered from Switzerland." Adriana carefully put her palm on her father's dry hand. "Nothing, Mammy. We'll manage somehow," her daughter promised her. "A very good man helped me here in the colony. They took me to work in a cafe, but only as a cleaner, but everything is better than nothing." Nancy, sobbing with happiness that her daughter was home at last, put her head on her shoulder. "I don't care what you do. The main thing is that you came home safe and sound. God, I wouldn't wish that on an enemy. Although your Heracles is a real scoundrel. You don't have to explain anything to me. Do you think your father, and I didn't realize who really stole those drugs? Your Heraclius was still smiling in the courtroom as if he had to. Damn him to hell, Mom," Adriana said reproachfully. It was so necessary then. Now he's waiting for me, I'm sure." The mother looked in amazement into her daughter's green eyes. "What?" Nancy couldn't believe her ears. "And you mean to tell me that after everything he's done to you, you still believe him?" The girl lowered her eyes in a flash. It was hard for her to explain to her mother how strong her feelings for the surgeon were. "Words can't explain it, Mom," Adriana said quietly at last. "We're connected, you know? Probably for life." Nancy looked at her daughter in silence and then cautiously said, "Daughter, I've been a librarian for 30 years, and I can tell you with certainty that no work in which the protagonist thought the same way as you never ended with a happy ending." Adriana smiled instead of answering. "I'll get settled in the city, get a job, and I'll try to get a loan for my father's treatment. Maybe if I'm approved, we'll be able to get my father back to normal. You just do not worry, Mommy. Everything will work out for sure." Adriana changed the unpleasant subject. And now she was walking along the Spring Avenue, heading towards the big, beautiful building of the Invest Bank, where she wanted to try her luck with the loan money. A little over a month had passed since her return. During this time, she had managed to get a job as a cleaner in the cafe where the head of the colony had sent her, and even to prove herself on the good side. The girl had performed her duties with diligence, for which the director, a broad-shouldered man of Oriental appearance, named Mason, had given her a small bonus. The only thing that constantly depressed the girl was the lack of feedback from her fiancé. Ironically, though he picked up the phone afterwards, he was not eager to see his liberated bride. The young man constantly referred to his busy schedule and the large number of patients he had to deal with all the time. Adriana, though she sensed the unkindness in his voice, continued to convince herself that all her thoughts about Irakli's dishonesty were just speculation and shards of the paranoia that had developed in her, to some extent, during her time in prison. The girl entered the spacious premises of the bank, having clarified from the guard where she had to queue up to apply for a loan. Adriana waited patiently. After standing in a long queue and giving the bank employee all the necessary documents for consideration, Adriana remained standing at the office, again waiting for the decision of her question. After a few minutes, the bank employee came out and quietly asked Adriana to follow her straight to the director's office. There Adriana saw a large, balding man holding a folder with the papers she needed to apply for a loan. "Here, Robert," annoyingly said the girl, a bank employee, nervously adjusting her bright yellow, uniform silk scarf. "I brought her in as you asked. Can I go now?" Adriana thought she heard genuine fear in the girl's voice. "Go, Lara." With a nod, the headmaster gave permission. "And remember for the future, this kind of clients should either come straight to me, or if things are really bad, straight to the police." Lara lowered her head and slowly backed out of the office, giving Adriana a sympathetic look. At the same second, Adriana realized that nothing good was waiting for her in this bank. "Well, young lady, what is your business here?" With irony in his voice, the director began. He seemed to mock the girl, and she perfectly understood this information from his tone. "I would like to take a loan for personal purposes." As confidently and calmly as possible, Adriana answered the banker. The man, in his turn, folded his fingers on the table and raised his eyebrows and scrutinized the girl's figure. "I'm sorry, did I say something wrong?" Miranda said impatiently. Though she needed money, she did not intend to endure another humiliation from someone who reveled in his small portion of power. The banker only clicked his tongue instead of answering. "She wants a loan. How daring the ex-convicts are nowadays. Why are you talking to me like that?" Adriana wondered. "Because I want to, and because that's the only way to talk to you." The headmaster answered her unhesitatingly. When did you quit? A month ago? I saw your early release certificate. Do you really think that our bank will give you a loan with open arms, and for such a large amount of money? Adriana felt her cheeks blush and her eyes moisten with tears of indignation. But I brought all the necessary documents. My father is very sick, understand? He won't survive if he doesn't get these medicines. My dad, he's an advanced production worker, got injured at the factory, tightened the machine. He's been in a wheelchair ever since. Not so long ago he had a relapse, and he completely lost the ability to move, and if not for me, no one will help him. Please, please, but Robert was as relentless as a rock in the middle of an icy sea. You tell beautiful tales, girl, but I've told enough of them in this life. They come, take out loans, and then have nothing to pay back. God only knows what you spend your money on. But I don't intend to cause any more losses to my bank. No, please, we've been there, we know. But I'll pay you back honestly. Adriana insisted with all her might. You can see, I have a certificate of employment, everything according to the law. Of course you do. Cleaning lady? What else could a criminal who'd been out of prison a few weeks? I'd be surprised, Miranda, if you suddenly found yourself a top manager, for example. That would be extremely, by the way, positive for your ability to pay. Adriana wiped her tear-wet cheeks and lowered her eyes. She had already realized that she had been summoned here solely for the amusement of the headmaster, and no amount of pleading would soften the heart of this miser. Go, and you'd better not come back here ever again. Unless you want to go back to jail next time. The businessman warned the girl, after which the former prisoner left his office crying. Walking back into the hall, immersed in her own unhappy thoughts, Adriana suddenly heard behind her back a woman's screams, first quietly and then louder and louder. After all, she couldn't pass by without finding out what was going on. Her voice at that moment sounded unusual, firm, and confident, and she herself could not explain how she managed to overcome her own inner barriers and shyness. She knew only one thing: she had to save this man without fail. There was the sound of keys. Someone was calling for an ambulance. Adriana, meanwhile, threw off her old coat from her shoulders and put it under the man's head. After that, the girl began to give the old man indirect heart massage, not forgetting to count to 30, pressing on his chest every time she said the next count. Interspersing her actions with artificial respiration, Adriana was able to achieve that the patient first issued a squeezed, almost indistinguishable sigh, and then his chest began to rise and fall much more confidently. The man coughed loudly, and at that moment, near the bank building, the sirens of an ambulance sounded. Thank God! Adriana exhaled, running her hand through her loose hair. We made it. A few minutes later, the medical professionals were on the scene. When the elderly stranger had already been loaded onto a stretcher and transported to the ambulance, Adriana was suddenly approached by one of the doctors. A young guy about her age sincerely praised the girl and thanked her for the highly qualified help rendered to the old man. You did well, he said cheerfully. If it were not for the way you pumped him out, the old man would be already in the other world. The medic looked up expressively. Now he's in a coma, but we'll connect him to a ventilator, pump what you need, and I'm sure he'll come to his senses quickly. Thank God, he's a sturdy pensioner. Adriana looked down in embarrassment. She realized that she hadn't done anything special. She was just doing her job. After all, medicine had always been her calling, and she had been happy to help people when she worked at the local clinic. You should be proud of yourselves, the young medic encouraged the girl. By your actions, saved a man's life. That's worth a lot nowadays. Adriana smiled and mentally wished the elderly man all the best and a speedy recovery and left the bank. Upon returning home, the young nurse immediately realized that something was wrong. Nancy sat silently on the bed, and there was not a speck of blood in her face. Father was not in the room either. "Mother, what has happened?" Rushed to the woman the girl. "Where is Daddy? Why are you so pale?" Instead of answering, the woman let out a wistful sob. "Daddy was taken to the hospital this afternoon while you went to the bank," she explained. "They said his health was very bad. God, what are we going to do now?" Without hiding her emotions, Nancy burst into tears. Adriana felt immensely guilty about what had happened to her father and the fact that she could not get money for his treatment. "Daughter." Sobbing between fits of sobs, Nancy asked her daughter, "Adriana, have you been approved for a loan?" There was such an overwhelming plea in her mother's eyes that Adriana couldn't lie to her. "No, they said their bank doesn't give money to ex-convicts. No, Christy." Nancy replied, then hugged her daughter affectionately. "It's okay, we'll be fine." She tried to reassure herself and Adriana. "We've gotten out of worse than this, haven't we, honey?" "Of course we have." The girl nodded in response, and then it suddenly hit her. "Mom, I'm going to Iraqli. Are you crazy?" Her mother complained once again. "Why do you need him, Adriana?" "That bastard even stopped answering your phone calls. He just couldn't be bothered with me." The nurse dismissed it. "His parents have a lot of money. They'll help us, I'm sure. I'll go straight to him and tell him everything. He'll understand." Nancy only shook her head sadly. Daughter, life teaches you nothing." Adriana, with a decisive step, headed towards Irakli's house. She was sure that the young surgeon would help her and her family. After all, he had promised to marry her as soon as she was released. Nevertheless, for the last few days he really did not pick up the phone at all, and it involuntarily led Miranda to agonizing thoughts about their relationship. Yes, she and Irakli were indeed, as they called it, from different worlds. The surgeon's parents were wealthy businessmen involved in timber sales to the north. Rumor had it that they had several dozen $1 million in their accounts. Adriana's parents, on the other hand, could never boast of anything like that. Her mother, Nancy, worked all her life as a librarian in the city's central church, and her father, Benjamin, spent most of his working years in the pulp mill, where he had a really fatal accident that left the man disabled for life. Now truly cosmic money was needed to treat his father. Irakli remained her last, almost ghostly hope. Did the difference in their social status with Irakli interfere with her feelings? Adriana thought not. At least she had once thought so. And now, was her fiancé so busy that he couldn't even find a couple hours in his tight schedule to meet her at the colony gate? The girl was tired of the endless questions and wanted only one thing right now, to find out the truth. On the way to her fiancé's house, Adriana involuntarily recalled the moment when she had first met Irakli's parents. He had invited her to their country house for a festive dinner. Vanessa, his mother, had prepared in advance for the guests' arrival, ordering the best dishes from her favorite restaurant. She herself did not like cooking and did not know how to cook. Christopher, Adriana's father, was looking forward to seeing the bride of his only son, and therefore even helped his wife to set the table. Unfortunately, the girl did not live up to their hopes. Seeing on the doorstep of a pretty shade, in a simple chintz dress in a flower, and in cheap shoes, Vanessa was in mute amazement. This was not the kind of choice she had expected her son to make. "Miranda?" In a patronizing tone, she asked, clarifying if this shepherdess was indeed her Irakli's girlfriend. "Are you really Miranda, my son's friend?" "Yes." Miranda answered embarrassed and immediately lowered her gaze. But to be honest, she was a little afraid of the tall, statuesque woman who was her fiancé's mother. "Good afternoon. Nice to meet you." Miranda couldn't find anything else to say to such a dazzling lady. Vanessa, in whose ears and on whose fingers sparkled large earrings and diamond rings, only with a superior gesture invited her inside. At the same moment, Irakli himself appeared from the depths of the house. He, too, was clearly embarrassed by his mother's behavior, so he tried to make a joke to somehow diffuse the situation. However, it did not save the evening. During the whole dinner, the woman did not utter 2 words, only studied the other half of her son with a contemptuous look. Apparently, the same opinion was held by his father, because when Irakli escorted Miranda and personally put her in a cab, the guy was immediately criticized by his parents. "Who the hell is Miranda?" "Huh, son," Vanessa wailed. "Couldn't you find someone better? She's as poor as a church mouse. We don't need a daughter-in-law like that. My God, she's even got leatherette shoes. I'm sorry, son, but I agree with my mother." Christopher stepped in. "We have a house, if I may say so, noble, and we do not intend to let any poor here. Have fun, but don't let her count on more than that. She has chosen the wrong young man, a beggarly adventuress. Oh, the wrong one." Irakli, in whose head, which even then, began to creep thoughts of regular poker games, drinking and the like, just waved away. "Say, calm down, parents. We are not like that. Not serious in general." However, Adriana, he told exactly the opposite, until the passion for gambling finally absorbed him, and Irakli did not slip to shameful for a surgeon stealing, as well as framing his own favorite girl. Adriana tried to put all the bad memories out of her mind, but when she came to the house where Irakli's parents lived with their son, she couldn't believe her own eyes. Next to the elite high-rise apartment building was a wedding cottage. A white limousine literally shone from rubbed to a shine tanks and waited for the main culprits of the celebration to sit in it. The guests near the entrance were dressed very elegantly and very expensive. However, most of them, the girl recognized perfectly well. They were her colleagues at the private clinic, where she once worked together with her fiancé. In the next second, the ground literally went out from under Adriana's feet. The nurse had to grab onto the stone wall of the house to keep from falling. From the entrance, dressed in a luxurious black tuxedo, Irakli slowly came out, but not alone, but with a charming bride, whose wedding dress Adriana herself could only envy. The surgeon's bride was Camille, the daughter of the director of a private clinic who came there once a year in order to ask her father for as much money as possible. Camille was a famous socialite in the city, and few people would have thought that she would have been willing to pay attention to a man like Irakli. Yes, his parents were fabulously wealthy, but still, young Irakli did not fit into the tastes of the ever-cheerful and sparkling inner energy Camille. And yet, there you are. Adriana had never expected such a betrayal from her boyfriend. Anything but not a rich beauty who could be married only because of money and position in society. Well, a shrewd move by Iraklius. Adriana said gloomily under her breath, "Now you will never have to think about the future again. Love and advice." In tears, Adriana hurried away from the house, away from her hated fiancé and his rich parents. Behind her, she could hear the cheers of the guests and the laughter of Camille. It was good that at least someone was really happy that day. The nurse thought to herself as she walked farther and farther away, unable to hold back the tears of resentment and betrayal that flowed down her cheeks. Passers-by looked at her with sincere surprise and incomprehension. How could this pretty girl go crying on such a beautiful sunny day? What is in her heart? Did she need any help? But Adriana tried not to look around. She kept her gaze fixed on her feet and kept walking forward and forward, completely unaware of where and why she was going. But most importantly, how could she save her father when the last and faintest hope was lost to her forever? Being in upset feelings, Adriana did not immediately pay attention to a large black business class car stopped just a few meters away from her. A foreign car of the latest model, it attracted the gazes of passers-by. After all, not every day they could see on the gray roads of their city such a miracle of automobile construction. Out of the car came out an athletic-looking, trim, broad-shouldered man, about 35 years old. With an easy gait, the stranger approached Adriana, waving his hand in a friendly manner. In an effort to attract the girl's attention, the young driver of the foreign car smiled broadly, revealing 2 rows of impeccably straight and snow-white teeth. "Hello," he greeted her cheerfully. "Why, is she so beautiful and crying?" Adriana looked at the tall, handsome man in total confusion. She did not understand what he wanted from her. "Hello," she said slowly. "I'm not crying at all, just a speck in my eye." Adriana didn't want to go into details about her condition in front of a stranger. "Who are you?" The man happily extended his broad palm to her. "My name is John. I work as a security guard for a very respectable man whom you saved the other day. He came out of his coma today, and the first thing he asked me to do was to find you and bring you to him. He wants to see you, Miranda. Right, that's your name, isn't it?" "Adriana," the nurse corrected him. "But I still don't understand what this is about. I haven't helped anyone but—" Suddenly the girl stopped. She understood, and from her face the guard guessed that the nurse had finally realized who she had saved in the bank from a heart attack. Confusedly wiping away her tears, Adriana looked into John's face. From him came only kindness and desire to thank the girl for saving his boss. As a result, the nurse agreed to go with the guard, and in half an hour, she was taken to an elite private clinic, much larger and better than the one where Adriana herself used to work. "Wow," the girl marveled sincerely. As she and John walked through the lobby to his boss's luxurious private room. "Impressive?" Winking at her, John said cheerfully, "Christopher always stays only in suites like this when he has health problems." "Christopher?" Adriana asked. So that was the name of this mysterious elderly man. John, meanwhile, was humming softly to himself. When they stopped next to the right room, the man said in a practiced official tone, "Christopher Parker, head of the Finance Consulting Corporation, is expecting you." Adriana smiled involuntarily and then ventured into the room. There on a high soft bed sat the same elderly pensioner whom she a couple of days ago performed artificial respiration and cardiac massage. "Good afternoon." Adriana greeted him politely. "I'm glad to see that you are feeling much better. Good day to you too." The man smiled. "But by your efforts, as they say, did you recognize me, sweetheart?" With a slight smile, he asked the girl. Adriana nodded. "Yes, she did. Only you were dressed differently that day, a little less stylish." She found the appropriate word, looking at the elderly businessman's immaculate silk pajamas. Parker gave a short laugh in response. "Well, yes, there is such a thing. In fact, I was at work that day." "Work? I don't get it, Adriana. How's that? You were dressed like a beggar?" "Yeah, that's the point. A working scheme, you know." The man smiled with one eye. "I wanted to inspect my new subordinates, the employees of the bank I bought a couple of months ago," explained the businessman. there was no time to pay an official visit to this place. So I was advised by a friend, also a businessman, to dress up as a poor man and see how you will be treated in that bank. This is a proven option, recognized throughout the business world, and it is in relation to the outcasts of society that the CEO can make the most accurate assessment of whether the company adheres to the chosen strategy of humanity and equality for all or not. "Excuse me, Christopher." In a voice full of sadness, Adriana said, "But most likely, the investment bank belongs to the second category." "I already guessed that," with a serious look answered Parker. "About the current director, we already have many questions. You can be sure he has already served his place in the soft chair." Adriana cautiously raised her eyes to the businessman. Does he know about her past? And about what she had to endure outside the walls of the colony? Parker continued his story as if he hadn't noticed anything. "While I was there demonstratively twisting and standing in line, unsuccessfully waiting to be noticed, I suddenly felt sick. I felt dizzy, and then my heart gave out. Right here." The businessman pointed to his chest. "But the employees of this investment company didn't give a damn about me. Can you imagine? I heard by ear, when I was already sliding down the wall, how their guard just laughed at me, saying that some vagrant had too much alcohol, so he laid down at our place, as if in a hotel room. My clothes really embarrassed those employees, but on the other hand, they had never seen me in person, so they had nothing bad on their minds. So Adriana, simple human indifference turns out." The man shook his head sadly, and then finished the story. "And you were the only one who was not shy and not afraid to give me first aid, saved me, you might say, from the stupidest death." Adriana saw a tiny tear roll down from one corner of Christopher's eye. "Then the ambulance brought me to the intensive care unit, but I don't remember it, because I was in a coma. John told me that later. He said that the doctors were surprised when after I came to my senses, the first thing I did was to throw off my gray wig, and they almost fainted." Christopher laughed, and Adriana, who did not care to laugh at all, only pretended to smile. She herself at the same time, taking advantage of the moment, imperceptibly wiped a tear from her face. "Yeah," the girl shook her head. "You scared everyone so much, Christopher." Now in front of the former prison nurse sat not an old man of retirement age, and Christopher in appearance was no more than 55, and no gray hair, of course, he was not in the past. On the contrary, he had a beautiful silky hair, light blonde color, and despite all his wrinkles, remained in a fairly fit for his age. In general, the businessman gave the impression of an extremely pleasant man, albeit with a not quite ordinary sense of humor. Adriana still could not get out of her head the deed of her former fiancé. In fact, he had embarrassed her in front of the whole town, because everyone knew that he and Miranda were to be married as soon as she was released. Now the girl could no longer not only get a job in her professional profile, but in general she was ashamed to even show her face to her former colleagues and friends. What will they say about her now, if they don't say it out loud already? For everyone, Adriana became something like an unwilling scapegoat who obediently accepted all the small and not so small sins of her immoral master, which for the girl was Heracles. Her love for him was too strong and obsessive, so much so that Adriana could not see his true attitude to her in time. And when she realized it, it was too late, and nothing could be changed. Christopher, noticing how deep Adriana was in her own thoughts, coughed embarrassedly and drew her attention back to him. Adriana stirred like a frightened doe. She hoped she hadn't said any of her involuntary musings aloud. "Forgive me," she apologized. "I'm afraid I'm just too tired from all the events of today, and so I lost the thread of our conversation. Anyway, I'm very glad you're feeling better. You'll be discharged soon, and you can go back to your normal life. You will continue to inspect your banks as a vagabond." Adriana smiled sadly, while the millionaire seemed to understand without words. "Well, that's true, of course it is, but—" The millionaire looked enigmatically at the girl sitting in front of him, and then decided to ask the question that was bothering him. "Adriana, can I ask you one more favor?" "I'll tell you right away that it will be paid generously. Don't even worry about that." Adriana looked suspiciously at her new acquaintance. "It depends on what it's about," the girl answered cautiously. Christopher calmed down a bit and continued. "You see, from time to time in life, we all have terrible and tragic things happen to us, and I, alas, was no exception." The man paused for a moment to gather his wits. "You see, my son needs special qualified help now. I guessed long ago that you didn't just help me that day at the bank. You had a doctor's reflex. I found out your background, but I don't care about that. At the end of the day, it's not what we've been through. It's whether we're still human. You, I see, weren't still or a good person, and only you can help my son to regain his faith in life." Adriana looked at the businessman with astonishment. Finally, she nodded, saying, "You may continue. A year ago, my son and his mother were involved in a terrible car accident. My wife, to my great regret, could not be saved then, but my son was left a wheelchair-bound invalid, but he still has every chance to walk again. However, my boy has fallen into a deep depression, blames himself for the fact that that day he could not cope with the control, because of which the car was carried out on the oncoming traffic. I'm sorry." Adriana responded sympathetically, "Thank you." The millionaire nodded. "I only want you, Miranda, to help my son to learn physical therapy again. And at the same time, I want you to supervise his medication. The thing is, Ethan seems to be angry at everyone and everything, not following doctor's orders, finally giving up on himself. I understand that he's just punishing himself for what happened, but I want my son, I mean my real Ethan, not a pale shadow of him. Well, that's my offer, okay?" Adriana took her time answering, deciding to ponder Parker's proposal first. On the one hand, of course, she was a little afraid to go to the house of a stranger and take responsibility for the fate of the banker's son. But on the other hand, now her family needed money for her father's treatment more than ever, and helping people is still her main calling, which for several years spent in prison, Adriana had already managed to miss a lot. The nurse was not completely sure if she could get Ethan back on his feet, but it was definitely worth a try, especially since Christopher had promised her complete protection from the outside world and confidentiality. In other words, he'd promised that no one she knew, and especially not Irakli, would know where she was or why she was there. Good. Adriana finally agreed. "Just give me one night, please. I need to warn my mother and pack some of my things." The businessman gladly agreed and thanked the girl for such a noble deed. That same evening, Adriana told her mother about everything and promised her that in a couple of weeks she would be able to transfer the first amount of money to her card, on which she would be able to buy at least a few vital injections for their father. The mother just burst into tears of happiness and kissed her daughter on both cheeks. "Blessings, Adriana, on your good journey." The woman stayed at home, while Miranda got into Christopher's big black foreign car, and with his invariable security guard driver John, went to the millionaire's house. Ethan's acquaintance with Adriana did not go well from the start. Arriving at the luxurious Parker mansion, the girl was first of all taken to get acquainted with her future patient. However, the son Christopher flatly refused to accept the guest in his room. Not only that, The very idea of therapeutic exercise and physiotherapy, the guy took, as they say, in a flip. "Who did you bring to me, Dad?" Ethan asked in a frustrated tone. "Why did she come here in the first place? Didn't you realize that I don't want to hear any more about my recovery? It's impossible, you know. I'm my own boss, and I decide whether I live or rot like a plant, and I deserve only the latter." A grim-looking guy, a little older than Adriana, was sitting in a wheelchair, swearing like a 12-year-old boy. Adriana was surprised to see his messy hair and an old t-shirt with the logo of some sci-fi movie on it. For all his unwillingness to live, couldn't he at least wash himself? What kind of weird form of protest is this? Miranda thought as she unpacked her belongings in her assigned room of the mansion. The irony was that in the room next to hers lived the millionaire's son, whose dialogue with his father she had just overheard. She was not eavesdropping on purpose, but this Ethan was so loud that his cries literally shook the whole floor. "Son, calm down, please." His father tried to calm the boy down. "You at least try to get in touch with her. She is a nurse from God. She saved my life, you know, son. Maybe she can help you get out of that damn chair." But Ethan had no intention of solving the problem peacefully. "She's gonna help me? Me? Dad, are you serious? Or are you still jerking me around? Yeah, she won't even be able to pick me up if I collapse in the middle of the gym." "Then don't fall." Parker shouted at his son. "Hold on, yell, scream, whatever you want to do, but do not fall. Why am I talking to you like a little kid again, huh? Adriana stays here and tries to help you. That's my last word." The girl heard the door close behind Christopher with a loud slam. At that moment, Adriana realized the seriousness of the situation and prepared herself for the hard, monotonous work that seemed to last for a long time. Adriana was not one to give up so easily. The history with Araceli and the colony had only hardened her already combative nature. The next morning, the nurse made a schedule of medications and detailed all the steps of her sessions with Ethan. Of course, the businessman's son flatly refused to comply with the recommendations, and at every opportunity tried to get Adriana out of her mind, provoking her into a new scandal. Here, the girl put a small sheet, printed from the computer on the guy's desk. "You have to follow this daily routine and a system of exercises to ease your spine, the gradual transition back to an upright position." "What?" The guy mumbled back. "I'm not doing anything. You're wasting your time, Adriana." Ethan defiantly opened a magazine and shielded himself from the girl with it. "I'll meet you at the gym today. Class starts in 40 minutes. If you don't show up, you're on your own." Adriana answered him calmly and proudly went back to her room to practice the necessary exercises. Naturally, at the appointed time, no one showed up at Adriana's gym, and the second time, and the third time too. Then the girl decided to take Ethan on the sly, and having studied some medical literature, decided to realize what she had planned. The next morning, Ethan looked out of the window and was literally stunned to see Adriana sitting on a special yoga mat in the middle of a neatly cut and green lawn, practicing various not very complicated asanas. The nurse was dressed more than modestly, no provocatively tight tights or short shirts, only clean, light, and practical clothes, which, nevertheless, did not embarrass her smooth and graceful movements. The former prisoner's stretching skills were always good, so she could easily perform some impressive tricks that would make an ordinary person want to do the same thing after her. What about a handicapped person? "What are you doing here?" asked Ethan, who arrived half an hour later in a wheelchair. "Are you practicing yoga or something?" "Yes," Adriana answered him with a peaceful exhale. Would you like to join me? Sure. Ethan answered cheerfully in the nurse's tone. There's just one little problem. I'm an invalid. Why are you poisoning me? You think I don't know what you're getting at? Do you want me to come to you, to your Dan classes? Adriana smoothly came out of another asana and then answered Ethan in a completely indifferent manner. I don't want anything from you. I just do yoga outdoors because I love my body and my spirit. And if a person loves his body, respects it, and does not sit all day, dirty in a wheelchair, hiding behind far-fetched complexes, then the spirit of such a person will be fine. You ask yourself first, are you normal at all? Your father does everything for you just to get you interested in life again. Not only that, you have the means to lead a full life. And you've got it in your head, like an idiot, that you're handicapped. So you cover yourself with it, spitting on yourself and everyone you care about. The guy's face was contorted with a grimace of pain and anger. How dare you? You don't know anything about me. How can you talk about me? Get out of here. You didn't hire me, Christopher did. Adriana exhaled. It's up to him to fire me. You'd better spend your energy on your exercises instead of wasting it like this. You might be able to do something like what I just did here later. It was Adriana's first small victory over Ethan's stubbornness. The next day, the young man was clearly reluctant and skeptical, but came to the nurse's class. However, contrary to his expectations, the girl did not praise the guy. On the contrary, she did not stop scolding him and somewhere even hurt his male pride, just to awaken his inner motivation. Eventually, it worked. Ethan started taking the medications prescribed by the doctors, following his diet, and taking care of himself again, but most importantly, he came to Adriana's classes every day. Ethan took his first independent steps with great difficulty. The untrained, relaxed body simply refused to take the load he was supposed to, and that gave Ethan terrible pains in the back and lower back. How many times he wanted to give up, and was literally ready to burn his nurse with a look, if only she would stop hurting his ego. But the effect of such training, when Ethan was, as they call it, on adrenaline, increased many times over. In a few months he could already move around the house with the help of crutches, and in another 6 months he could walk with a cane. Ethan's happiness, and especially his father's, was unparalleled. My God, Adriana, it's just a miracle. Christopher never ceased to be amazed. Not only has he gotten out of his wheelchair, but he's been much less rude to me. I'm even afraid to ask, what are you doing with him? Miranda just laughed in response. I motivate him, Christopher, and nothing more. The girl said, he needed sporting anger, aggression, but the kind that gives him the strength to live. So I pressed him on some emotional points. Don't talk about it, Ethan, I beg you. Otherwise, I don't know how he'll behave in the future. What are you? Absolutely not. The businessman whispered conspiratorially and then crossed himself several times. Adriana, you really have become our family's guardian angel. I never thought I would say this, but I am truly grateful to the fate that she crushed me in that bank. Otherwise, you and I would never have met. You've got a tongue. Adriana jokingly chided him. The main thing is to live a long life and keep an eye on your condition. If anything, immediately call an ambulance with the heart jokes. Oh, how bad? Yes, I believe it. The millionaire agreed with her. In gratitude to Adriana for her help and good attitude towards his son, Christopher did everything possible to save her sick father. Benjamin was transferred to the best city clinic, where he was given the most modern treatment, to pay for which the businessman personally volunteered. Soon the condition of Adriana's father showed the first improvement. Nancy did not stop rejoicing with her daughter and thank God, but more, of course, the banker Parker, without whose help Benjamin would have been waiting for disconnection from all life support systems. All the while the girl lived in the house of a millionaire. She received from him a generous salary, most of which Adriana invariably sent to her mother. A joyful event in the life of Nancy was the purchase of a new one-bedroom apartment, in which she was going to move with her husband when he finally recovered and can again move in a wheelchair. And so it happened. A couple of years later, Benjamin's physical condition not only returned to its former level, but also significantly improved, allowing the man to really enjoy every day that passed. Now they live in a nice new home and enjoy what they have with each other, not getting tired of thanking his favorite daughter every day. And Adriana's personal life has also improved, and in the most unexpected way. The thing is, she started dating Ethan. When Christopher found out about the affair between the nurse and his son, he was very surprised. You couldn't stand her, remember? His father asked his son with a sly squint. And now then, in the brides of her, write her down. I'm not just writing her down, I'm marrying her, Dad. The boy laughed back. I really fell in love with Adriana from the first day I met her. But I didn't realize it at the time. But when I saw her in that gray sweatshirt and wide pants doing yoga, that's when it really hit me. My father only jokingly wagged his finger in response. He had long ago realized that Miranda, his son, was no better match for him. Adriana herself had been hiding her feelings for Ethan for a long time, even from herself, but eventually, after the boy had gotten back on his feet, there was no need to play the feud anymore, and they began to be friends openly, and then moved to a more romantic level of their relationship. For the first time in her life, Adriana was 100% sure that Ethan, who blew the dust off her and made her incredibly happy, would never betray her for anything in the world. Her parents agreed with this opinion. So when the Young announced to them about their imminent wedding, Nancy and her husband only rejoiced for their daughter. Here, they said, Adriana finally met a worthy man. The girl herself retrained as a teacher of physical therapy and began to lead groups of therapeutic gymnastics and physical training, where she helped people recover from serious injuries and maintain their health even in the presence of chronic diseases. Ethan was incredibly proud of his young wife. More soulful and understanding subtle person he never dreamed of seeing next to him. 2 years later, Adriana gave birth to 2 adorable twin girls named Emily and Cindy. Needless to say, how happy their father was when he learned that he had 2 beautiful daughters. Ethan, by this time, had already established himself in the financial market as a successful young businessman worthy to continue his father's business. Christopher gave in his management, the very investment bank which began their acquaintance with Adriana, and the young banker began to manage it quite well. One day, when Adriana arrived at her husband's office, accompanied by a baby carriage, Ethan quietly led her into his office and silently pointed to the CCTV cameras installed in the HR department. "Do you recognize it?" he asked, looking at his wife. Adriana didn't understand what he meant at first, but after a closer look, she felt a chill run down her spine. Her ex-fiancé, Irakli, was sitting in the personnel department, his head sullenly drooping. It was obvious that the man had given up a lot in recent years. I checked him through my channels. The young businessman told his wife. He's completely drunk, lost everything he had in illegal poker clubs. That's why his wife and kid left him, and his rich parents disowned him. So Irakli was left all alone in this world. There is still justice on this earth. What is he doing here? Slowly asked his wife, Adriana. He came to apply for a job with us. Ethan answered nonchalantly. He wants to try his hand at being a guard. Do you think we should give this man a second chance? Ethan had long known about his wife's past, including Irakli's betrayal, but he had never judged her. On the contrary, he sympathized with her and dreamed of personally punching the bastard in the face. And now Ethan offered his wife to do with this scoundrel whatever she deemed necessary. If you want, I'll go out there right now and beat him up so he won't be in this town for another year, but for you and everything he's done to you. Adriana shook her head negatively. You shouldn't. Look at him. I think life has punished him enough already. Let's not add to his misery, shall we? Get him a job, not as a security guard, but as a janitor. Let him work in the fresh air like I used to. Besides, that way he can't steal anything from the office and then gamble it away. Whatever you say. Ethan nodded, then turned off the camera monitor. I'll try to get off early tonight. Shall we go to a restaurant? I'd love to. Adriana responded, then sent a kiss to her husband and pointed to the stroller. I'll let my mom know we're going out tonight so she can watch the girls. Going outside, Adriana tried to get into the car as inconspicuously as possible, having put the children inside and fastened them securely in the small, brightly colored car seats. She did it just in time. As soon as she slammed the car door shut, Irakli's figure emerged from the bank building. Fortunately, he couldn't see her from behind the tinted windows of the car. Looking at the gaunt, thin figure of the man she had once loved so much that she had agreed to go to prison for his sake, Adriana felt pity for Irakli. In front of her was a man who had destroyed his own happiness and lost his own opportunities. And all this for a phantom chance to chase and beat fate. For a second, it seemed to Miranda that her ex-fiancé, by some sixth sense, caught her presence in the neatly tinted foreign car. Iraklius looked at Adriana's car for several long moments, literally devouring with his gaze the one who, according to his assumption, could be inside behind the wheel. Had he guessed that Adriana was the one inside? The woman didn't want to know the answer to that question. Instead, the words her father had once spoken rang clearly in her mind. He's possessed. That's why his eyes are burning. 3-7 ace.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Julia decided at an early age. Girls are either beautiful or smart. The girl knew very well she could choose, and she chose to be smart. The example of her older sister Helen was in front of her eyes. Everyone around her admired her beauty. Her hair was light blonde, silky clean, her eyes mermaid green, a figure they call model-like. Helen from an early age was focused only on her looks. She read a lot, but it was fashion magazines with advice on makeup, diet, and so on. And Valen's girlfriends were exactly the same. Julia thought they were pretty, frivolous, fools. The mother, who lived alone 2 daughters, had high hopes for the eldest. If you marry Helen, we'll live happily ever after. Julia then was still a very young girl, studied in the 4th or 5th grade. The girl was frankly perplexed. How can one put the responsibility for her happiness and well-being on some other person? Did the mother, who had been burned herself, not make the right conclusions? Once Julia asked her mother directly, "You married your father for his money too. And he left us, went to a younger and prettier, even and left nothing to you or the children, because she had a good appetite. And now you teach the tape the same thing, so that it is the same." Splash, nodded Mom. Helen is quite different from us. First of all, young, and secondly, she is much prettier than me. And she has me. It was me who had to come do everything myself, and I'll give you a hint and teach you everything. It will be good for you too, if you listen to me. Julia only sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful, kind, but too frivolous. Both her mother and Helen lived with rose-colored glasses on their eyes. They all dreamed of a beautiful life. They believed that looks were the determining factor in a woman's success. But that's about it. Julia differed from her peers in her character, always being pragmatic, responsible, farsighted. And she clearly understood that to achieve something in this life, you have to work hard. And the options that her mother and older sister had in mind, the rich male benefactors, were all unreliable, fragile, illusory. Helen jokingly called her little sister a nerd. Her mother was always trying to remake Julia, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most interesting parent sincerely believed that she wished her child well. "I'm worried about your future." "Well, how can you not understand? You're beautiful, we got such. You got the best of me and your father. When you finish school, we'll find you a wealthy fiancé. Just don't be like that." Then like cheerful and smiling. "No, thanks. After school, I will go to study economics." Julia answered. "Well, do you know what the competition is?" Helen always started to argue at this point. "You either have to be 7 eyes in the head there, or you have to have a good deal." "Yeah," Mom sighed. "We can't afford commercial education, and you can't get in for free." But Julia, trying not to listen to the arguments of her sister and mother, strived for her goal. Day and night she sat over textbooks, looked for additional courses on the internet, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in the local supermarket, had no money for her daughter's education, and her father almost did not participate in the children's lives, as he had a new family. No, he still transferred some pennies, but everything was limited to that. No communication, no support or help in difficult situations. Julia knew from childhood that he could not be counted on. The girl deep down wanted at least once to meet and talk to her second parent. It seemed to her that perhaps the character she went just in him, because the mother and Helen Julia did not resemble at all. But he did not seek to meet his daughters, and Julia, she didn't want to impose. And it was scary to face indifference, or even worse, dislike of a native man. Her father was a businessman who owned a chain of stores. She had no time at all for student parties, going to clubs, and other such entertainments. Sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out and have some fun. But the girl realized that every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, there was no money. Her mother tried to replenish her daughter's card with a small amount every month. Julia knew that it was a significant part of her parents' salary and was very grateful to her. It was not enough, very little. But still, it was the help from her mother that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when suddenly something in the university clinic changed, and students were obliged to pay for the dormitory. And before, you could live there for free. Julia saved money on literally everything. But she didn't have time. She knew that she was going to her goal, which meant that sooner or later everything would be fine. Everything will be as she had dreamed. But on New Year's Eve, there was an event that made Julia reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened at that hectic time when before the New Year students try to pass all credits in time to start the winter session after the holiday without debts. Julia was just preparing for a credit in economic history when she received a call from her sister. Helen's picture popped up on the screen. On it, the girl smiled widely and looked like a star. Julia immediately realized something was wrong. Helen would not call her at the 3rd hour of the night. It's her. Juliet is awake, studying for her exams. And her sister should be having her 7th dream by now. Mom's in trouble. Helen's voice rang through the phone. It seems that she was close to hysterics. "Come over. What's wrong?" Julia felt her limbs grow young and her stomach felt empty for some reason. Anxiety squeezed her heart ice cold, and a bus hit her with a rusty hand. What when she was alive? But it was impossible to get any intelligible answers from the Italian. She was already sobbing and sobbing into the tube, dropping only a few insignificant phrases. Mostly they were wails about how she was scared and bad now. As if the trouble happened in the evening, but Alina was informed only now, just a couple of minutes ago. And she immediately dialed her sister. Of course, there was no talk about any credits and exams at that moment. In the morning, Julia took the first flight home. She was almost the only passenger at the bus station at such an early hour. Julia found her sister in a terrible state. Her hair shot up, her face swollen with tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, a very young Molly. Helen was already a mother of many children. Her eldest son Larry, then 2 girls, Christina and Molly. None of the fathers were involved in raising the children. Princes, sons of rich parents, refused to raise offspring and bathed in pennies with the elements. With Helen, they were just having fun, with nothing serious in mind. And that one kept stepping on the same rake on purpose to get pregnant in the hope of finding a happy, strong family. If something happens to her, how will I be alone with them? Helen looked at Julia with confused eyes, as if expecting her to offer a way out. But Julia, she was ready at this moment to hit her sister unbeknownst to her mother. And she only thinks of herself. How it happened. They had a corporate party, and Helen is machine carrying her daughter. Drunk, I guess. They told me Mom was crossing the road in the wrong place. Jumped out in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's kind of in the hospital now, too. He had a heart attack right there on the spot. Bye-bye. By the time we got there, I got a call late last night, and I called you right away. So Mom's alive. Julia checked. That was the most important thing to her. What hospital is she in? Morozov's. Julia jumped out of the house and called a cab. He seemed to be making good money. But all his property was prudently written down to his new wife, so that his ex-wife and children would have no claim to anything. It looked ugly, petty, even mean. In theory, Julia should have been just as resentful of her father as her mother, just as Helen was. But Julia had a dream. To study economics, start her own business, and one day meet her father on a case. A joint project, a lucrative contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had accomplished on her own, without his help. And then maybe they can talk on equal footing. And Julia achieved her goal. She got into the Faculty of Economics, where she was so eager. How happy she was when she saw herself on the list of enrolled. Screamed right in front of the computer monitor, jumped from happiness to the ceiling. She went crazy. Helen came into the room with little Larry in her arms. She had recently become a mother and given birth to a son by a rich man. He paid child support, but he did not want to communicate with his mother and Larry himself. Needless to say, these alimonies were pennies. Standard scheme of gray earnings, most of the income is hidden. Helen was just like her mother, even in an even worse version. But she was not going to give up and continued to dream of a prince, who will surely sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her eldest daughter in everything, adored her grandson. This is not surprising. Julia also gladly fiddled with the baby when she had time. But the girl did not understand how it was possible not to draw conclusions from what had happened. Wasn't it clear? The plan is not too good and often fails. It was time to choose another option. But no, Helen still hung out on dating sites, looking for bigger prey. I got in, Julia explained her strange behavior to her sister. Wow, cool. What, you're going to the city from us now? You're going away to study. Julia and her family also lived in the city, but in a very small, remote from the regional center. Gray 3-story houses, whole streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Julia's university was located there, and everyone called it that. Her mother, too, was happy to hear about her youngest daughter's enrollment. She had never hoped for such a thing. As it turned out, thought, let the little one, to show off, and when she realizes that nothing worked out, will go in the footsteps of her parents in the supermarket for the cash register. Well, and will think, finally, over the words of more experienced relatives. Realizes it is necessary to look for a rich and reliable man. And here's how it turned out. She did it. Good for you, daughter, Mom hugged Junior. I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry, I can't send you a lot of money, but at least a little for food, for housing, for being. Again, you need to dress nicely. In a big city, there's a better chance of meeting a decent man. Mom, you smiled at Julia again. She was touched by the fact that her mother supported and understood her, and even offered to help her. Julia knew. It's not easy for a mother to get that money, but she's willing to help her daughter while she's still a student. And that's priceless. Julia had a new life. She was given a room in the student dormitory, but not a separate one. The room had to be shared with 2 girls, but the roommates turned out to be very nice. They both studied at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, just like Julia herself, were focused on their studies and work. In general, the girls had a lot in common. With one of these neighbors, Valia, Julia even became friends. They kept their relationship even after they graduated from each of their universities and moved to rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. She was convinced in the first year that she had chosen the right direction. She found economics easy, the lectures seemed interesting, and term papers and tests were incredibly easy. Juliet even started earning money. It turned out that people are willing to pay a lot of money for essays and projects. Big it is by Julia's standards, of course. The girl had to work part-time and study a lot. She needs to get there as soon as possible. She has to realize she's with a loved one. At the hospital, Julia was told the terrible news. Mom's gone. She had just recently passed away. At the moment when Julia rushed to the clinic, everything happened in the intensive care unit. The doctor then said that there was no chance of a good outcome. The injuries were too serious, and Julia would not have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma, and still the girl fed herself for slowness, for not supporting her mother by the hand, while she was still not. Julia was signing some papers when she received a call from Helen. She had been informed by someone on the nursing staff, and now the older sister was in a state of near panic. It had been a difficult time, arranging the funeral, trying to bring the sister who was supposed to take care of her babies no matter what, and the gradual realization of the terrible fact that the nearest and dearest person in the world was now gone. Just know, that's all. The father did not show up at the funeral, although he could not have been unaware of what had happened. This man did not even call his daughters, did not try to understand whether they need his help. Probably thought they were adults. They were both over 18. So legally, the father was no longer their debtor. He paid child support until his daughters came of age, and there was nothing more to expect. It was then that Julia realized that she would not meet and communicate with this man, even when she reached the heights of her career. He didn't need Lenka and Mama, and they didn't need him either. No resentment. No, it's just that Julia suddenly realized that her father is a complete stranger to her. They may look alike in some ways, but he's a stranger, just a stranger. And that says it all. Helen, on the other hand, is a stranger, and she needs support. Helen cried nonstop for days. Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry. It would make it easier for her. While her sister was dealing with her grief, Julia helped her with her nephews. The little ones made her smile even in such a terrible situation. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their cute babbling. Nephews, like nothing else, showed Julia life goes on. Julia could not stay long with her sister. Winter session. Helen had already recovered a bit and even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted even more to have a supportive adult by her side. Her mom was gone. In spite of everything, Julia passed the session with honors. That meant an increased scholarship. But this money would not even be enough to rent a room for a month. The dormitory became paid because it was necessary to eat, dress, and pay for transportation. Julia tried to combine her studies and work in the cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible at once. A lot of passes and debts were accumulated. As a result, the girl did not even get admission to the next session. Expulsion loomed ahead. Teachers took into account the previous merits of the girl and went towards her. But she still failed. The only way out was the transfer to the correspondence department. Only here's the catch: budget places were all taken. The commercial option cost a fabulous amount of money for Julia. The rector offered a way out. One day he called Julia to himself and offered her the only, in his opinion, suitable option. "I know your situation. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy." So began the conversation a man who always reminded Julia of Carlson. Just as good-natured, full and short. "Student, you are diligent and promising. Such a one wants to help. That's why I'll close the session for you, no matter what. Let us draw the lines of the movie. And you take a sabbatical for a year. I'll help you get a job for family reasons. Raise money for school. You'll make it. You're a man of determination. And then when you stop, I'll help you with all the details. What do you think?" Julia thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session is not passed, that's for sure. So, expulsion. And where to go? To go home, to her parents' apartment. So there's already a new suitor living there, a young and kind of nice guy, Stepan. Unlike the previous aluminum suitors, he's not a rich major. The guy works at a construction site, working from dawn to dusk, earning money. Seems to love Helen very much and has taken in all of her children. Maybe they'll actually have a family. Julia is completely unnecessary there right now, and she doesn't want to live with her sister. No, Julia loves her very much. She is the only person in the whole world who can be related to her. But still Julia is used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there's a family with many children. You can't do that there. And after all, she doesn't want to leave Orkovsky. It's a big city. It's beautiful, spacious, interesting. Here there are more prospects for work and study. The urban-type settlement, where Julia spent her childhood, was associated with rage and hopeless longing. No, she didn't want to go back there at all. "You know, I'll probably take advantage of your offer," Julia smiled at the rector. "What a smart girl," asked the man. "You're good, you'll do well. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year, we will be waiting for you. Deal? It's a deal. Thank you very much for the offer." That same night, Julia started looking for a job. She urgently needed money, just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation of all. It turned out that it was simply unrealistic to find anything close to the desired profession for a girl with an incomplete university degree. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers did not even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl realized that she could show herself at the interview, but it did not even come to that. After a couple of days of fruitless searches, Julia realized it was time to part with the dream of working as an economist. Or rather, to postpone it until better times. In the meantime, it is necessary to find something. When the bar was lowered a bit, things went better. Julia found a lot of vacancies: waitress, cleaner, salesman. But the wages were meager. No, it would be enough to live on, especially if you save money. But Julia had to save up for a year of schooling. With those salaries, it was impossible. And yet Julia needed a job. Immediately, she chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. The arguments for this place were enough. First of all, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, the last job gave Julia the opportunity to write term papers and tests to order. And an extra penny in the piggy bank and brains are not idle. Total pluses. Work in the bar Julia even liked. The team is friendly, the bosses are loyal. The audience is decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about reputation. The atmosphere here was controlled. Undesirable elements were kicked out of security and never allowed in again. And another and another. Local band musicians and performers and visiting guests gathered here every night. In general, live music. And it was beautiful. Julia listened to the musicians' performances with pleasure, singing along, dancing. This in the bar was only welcomed. Going to work was like going to a holiday. In the bar, Julia finally understood the meaning of this popular phrase. Of course, with a waitress's salary, there are a lot of urgent things to do. Julia, in parallel, was looking for another job, more highly paid. But the girl knew even when she had to quit, she would come here to visit, just to be in this amazingly warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Julia through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother did not go away, but the girl was finally able to come back to life and believe that there are still a lot of good things ahead. It was in a rock bar that Julia met James. One day, the host introduced the guests to a new rock band, which appeared just a couple months ago. James was the bass player. But not only that, he was the one who had the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and the music. Modest, always kept in the shadows, but continuously observing all the behavior of the band members, the reaction of the audience. James was the main man in the crew. Although on stage most of the attention was drawn to the lead singer, you could feel it. It was noticeable from the first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out and reached out to him. She did not recognize herself. Julia realized that she was not in a position to fall in love and have affairs. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on her recovery at the university. She couldn't be distracted by all this. She couldn't be distracted. And yet, James did not study and did not flirt with waitresses, did not talk to anyone first. He was serious, focused on his work. Perhaps that was what bought the girl off. James was very much like herself. James began to appear often in the bar, sometimes with a group to work, sometimes just in the company of buddies to relax. Of course, they soon got to know each other, but he still acted kind of aloof, didn't show open sympathy. Sometimes Julia caught his eye, though. But James would immediately turn away and talk to someone else. And Julia wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to give her signs of attention, as visitors often do. And then Julia would let him know that she was interested in him. One day in the company of James was a girl. This representative of the beautiful half of humanity came with him before, but they were just friends, girlfriends, other members of the group. This one was clearly something between us and James. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing like that, but sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. Once she laid her head right on his shoulder, and James, casual, cold, and even stern, stroked her hair in a natural and very gentle gesture, as if she were a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling was beating in Julia's chest from behind the collar. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was jealousy. With surprising scrupulousness, Julia began to pick out her rival's flaws. Too thin, not even pretty either. It's a nose, long hair, a little too liquid. Anyway, how could this madam be as good as Julia? For the first time in her life, Julia seemed to feel smug about her looks. Nature had endowed her, like Helen, with beauty. Julia had heard many compliments from others about her figure. She is tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends generally advised her to try herself in a modeling agency. Only this work was not to Julia's liking. Well, she did not know how to show herself, even somewhere that humiliating it considered it. And here, despite such impressive external data, the rival Julia was such a blue stocking. In general, there was nothing outstanding in James's companion, not even an eye to catch on. Nevertheless, he clearly had very tender feelings for her. Her presence made him happy. Julia watched James carefully and could tell that he loved his companion. It was painful, thanks to the girl that is. So to James, Julia had made up her mind. Decided to do something she had previously considered unacceptable to herself. Her shift was coming to an end, but per usual she stayed late to help a waitress friend serve tables on a Saturday night. There were a lot of patrons. Julia waited for an opportune moment. She even had a little drink beforehand for courage, to feel more confident and relaxed. James stood up and headed for the exit. Someone called him. The music was blaring in the bar. It was impossible to talk on the phone in such an environment. Everyone went outside, to the porch of the bar, or to the smoking room. James chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow, now or never. The obnoxious girl who had been sitting next to James all evening stayed at the table. She chatted merrily with his buddies. You could see that they had all known each other for a long time. Probably a long and serious relationship. And yet still Julia will try otherwise. Otherwise, she'll regret later that she didn't even try. James stepped out onto the porch. He paced the square in front of the bar, patiently explaining something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. James was not smiling, not joking. Did he see the conversation was serious or unpleasant? It didn't matter. Julia would still approach him as soon as she did. James pressed reset and was about to go back to the bar, but Julia came out to meet him. Luckily, they were alone on the porch at that moment. Hi, Julia smiled at him. James looked at her with interest. We've said hello, and I think we already have. Julia nodded at me. I need to talk to you. James immediately stopped, tuned into the conversation. All his appearance showed that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. He could have brushed her off or shown irritation or displeasure. But James looked at her with his dark and intelligent eyes and waited. "I like you, and I've liked you for a long time." Julia decided to get right to the point. "I don't know how to explain it. I'm magnetically attracted to you. It's never happened to me before. Aya, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this." Julia lowered her eyes. There, she'd said it. What's next? James was probably just now finding the words to stitch her down as politely as possible. He probably was. Julia suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of her action. Why had she reached out to him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? James comes to the bar a lot. And then Julia felt his hands on her shoulders. A gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Julia, the name itself, as it escaped James's lips, sounded like beautiful music to the girl. Julia, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. James looked at her and smiled. He so rarely smiled. His eyes. The girl could see it clearly. They shone with happiness. Sincere, genuine. What's going on? Is he happy for her confession? Instead of words, James kissed Julia. The girl felt dizzy from it all. He was hugging her. More precisely, even held, because the girl's legs were literally under the painting kissed. Then he stroked her back and head, gently pressed her against him. I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm attracted to you in the same way. Then why? I didn't even notice it once. I thought you didn't care. I didn't want to embarrass you. I don't. Anyway, I'm older. Older for you. I thought you were attracted to other guys, brutal, successful. With your looks, anything's possible. You're beautiful. You're unreal. You even inspired my song. Didn't realize I'm an Olympic princess. Is that about you? No, Julia confessed. It's a very beautiful song. I love it. I didn't even realize it came from you. Oh yeah, that's right. And that girl who came with you. Are you two together? We are. James couldn't help but chuckle. Together. Ever since my parents brought me back from the hospital with a pink bow and told me that Svetka was my sister. So she's your sister. Julia laughed out loud. I thought so. That's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister, sister. James held Julia tighter to him and breathed in the scent of her hair, just passing through town. She's been married a long time, living far away with her husband. She misses the brotherhood of her troublemaking brother. Julia and James started dating. Turns out he's been sympathizing with the pretty waitress all this time. Why didn't he make any moves on her? I was going to. But later, when he's a little more cash flush. He had a clear attitude in his head. Girl, I'm interested in losers. So far, there was too much to do with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And oddly enough for a rock musician, was James shy around girls? No, he had a lot of friends with whom you can chat, laugh together. But Julia, she evoked in him a very special feeling, and that made James, used to performing in front of hundreds of people, cringe. But Julia made the first step, thus shattering all of James' doubts. And now they're together. James himself suggested moving in together. They decided to choose Julia's apartment. Convenient location, adequate cost, cozy room. So it was James who moved in with her. But he immediately took upon himself the payment of rent and minor repairs, which every dwelling needs from time to time. And it also turned out that James is an excellent cook. Julia's culinary talents just pales in front of his skill. James, as befits a creative person, created real masterpieces. Whether in the recording studio or in the kitchen, he was gentle, sensitive, and attentive, fully immersed in his work, but not forgetting about his beloved. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes they discussed the next song together. It happened that Julia would suggest to her beloved the necessary phrase or words. He happily grasped the idea, and then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, how? Participated in the creation of a hit? Julia completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting James, She did not know what it is love for a man. She had no time for that. First studying hard, then trying to survive. It turned out to be so pleasant to be near a man who embraces you, interested in your mood and well-being, looks at you with admiring eyes, as at some princess, and melt from the touch of warm, strong hands. Knowing that he, this tall man with black eyes, would do anything for you, Helen didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she had her own yardstick. He's poor, he doesn't even have his own apartment. Again, no steady job, no business. He's a musician, he's got his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There's a lot of these one-day bands out there. We don't know if they'll succeed. I think you got the wrong guy. With your looks, you shouldn't do that. It's okay with me. I have 3 kids. Who needs me? So I'm content with what fate gives me. I don't complain. But you? Julia didn't expect her sister to understand. They were always too different. But Julia didn't need understanding. She was happy, she was loved. She had someone close to her. Yeah, he was going through a rough patch. But James tried, went to his goal, worked hard, looked for the right contacts, planned something. Julia supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion. Many times he said that he was grateful to fate for such a gift, for her. One day James undertook a rather risky endeavor, inviting a famous rock band to Orkovsky. It was planned that his band would perform as a warm-up act for the famous musicians. This event was to increase the popularity of the band James. Well, and in general, the organization of such concerts is a way to earn good money. But something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. There was a big rock festival in a neighboring state. James didn't take that into account. Or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already in full swing. In general, James went into a big disadvantage payment of musicians' fees, rent of the hall and equipment, tickets for the rock band, promotional activities. All this was paid off only half of the money from ticket sales. The concert itself was great, but James had huge debts that had to be closed as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to look at her lover. During this period, he looked confused, anxious. I wanted to help him at least something. But how? Where did Julia get the money from? James took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him, the situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Julia offered to help. She had savings, money she was saving for her studies. Not much, of course, but still. In addition, the girl did what she had been against for a long time. She took out a consumer loan. These funds were quite enough to close the debt. From where? Surprised James when Julia handed him several packs of new crispy bills. Well, just out of the blue, my debt was paid off, plus the insurance. Finally paid off the cell phone case money. The girl lied. She knew. If she told James the truth, he'd never take her money. And so it wasn't like it was the last one that came in by accident. Thank you. James hugged Julia tightly. I'll pay you back. You'll see, we'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back. James paid the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. It was no longer possible to save for school, and in general, the salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar had fallen on hard times. It was good that James bought groceries and paid the rent. That is, he took the main part of the expenses on himself. James' income came from a few corporate gigs and the occasional part-time job. Unstable earnings, but still does not dry up, and the stream is empty and then thick. Julia, not caring about the financial side of their relationship. She enjoyed James' attention, bathed in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, support. Julia tried not to think about the future, but not to recover in the university this year will do it next year. Nothing to worry about. She still had time. The most important thing is that he, James, is there for her. Julia didn't know she was capable of such feelings. And then James disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing bad happened to him. It started out as a business trip. You can imagine, James grabbed Julia by the shoulder and even shook her a little. His eyes burned like 2 bright spotlights. You can imagine, I was invited to Germany to write music for a band. They found me on the internet, and they liked it. And now I'm invited." Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band James was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world. And they'd noticed James. They're offering him a partnership. Unbelievable. "I'm going to have to go away for a while," James continued. "Do you realize what that means?" Julia nodded. She understood the money, the fame, the dizzying opportunities for James to grow and develop as a musician. Useful acquaintances and connections. James would get things he'd never dreamed of, but it looks like they're going to have to part ways indefinitely. After all, James clearly said, "I have to leave me, not us." The packing started. James had a lot of things to sort out. First of all, finding a replacement. Someone has to play in his band in his place. Temporarily. While he was away, of course. Secondly, James had to apply for a passport and visa. Thirdly, packing. In all the hustle and bustle, he seemed to have forgotten all about Julia. James was too enthusiastic about the upcoming changes and prospects. The girl looked at him and realized he would forget about her. In another country, muted by new impressions, excited by work and success. Perhaps James would even find someone there. But James, he hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will pass quickly, and then there's the video link. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll make some money, finally pay you back in a decent way. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we can even buy an apartment. My band will get bigger. I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll know how to do things. Everything's gonna be fine." James truly believed that. Julia saw it. He wasn't lying, he wasn't bullshitting. But something told the girl that everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It's just that James himself doesn't realize it yet. That's how it turned out in the end. At first, James called every day, as promised, telling her how to settle in at the new place. Everything thrilled him, the experience overwhelmed him. And then he suddenly dropped off the radar. He just disappeared. He didn't call or answer Julia's calls. Long rings steadily ended with the message that the subscriber, apparently busy and therefore cannot answer. Julia was alarmed at first. "I thought that something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable." But soon she saw a fresh performance of that band on the music channel. James was with them. He was very different, mature, and even more serious than usual. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. It's just that he'd apparently decided to start a new life and cut off all his old ties, including forgetting about her. And Julia? At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain everything. But James disappeared completely out of her life. Julia made it a habit to watch the music channel every day. Every once in a while, she'd see James. He was never the center of attention, but he still got in the camera lens sometimes. And quite often the girl next to him was the same girl, either a makeup artist or the band's costumer. Beautiful, bright. Apparently, there was something between her and James. Julia was desperately jealous of James, both of this girl and of her lover's other potential husbands. She was hurt like she had never been hurt before, and also hurt and scared. Scared of being alone again without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant mixture of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing. Moneylessness. Julia could barely make ends meet. She had a tiny salary and a loan. Eventually, the bar went bankrupt. The new owners bought it and set up Julia's Coca Lounge. She had to quit, like all the other employees. Another blow. Julia had special memories and feelings connected with this place. And now there was no cozy bar where you could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. James would understand, support her. Everything was easier and more pleasant with him in general. But he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and seemed to have forgotten all about her. James had no idea how desperate she was. He never found out about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with the extra money she'd suddenly received. And of course, he has no idea she's been fired. And if he did, what would he care about her now? Julia had no time to go over the offenses and think about how it would be if she desperately needed a job, and preferably in a decently paid. And so the girl tirelessly scored the ads. Wanted to find something that would help to get out of the financial hole. Well, at least the landlord agreed to wait with payment. But he's got a lot of patience too. Julia will be asked to leave. This ad caught Julia's attention with the amount of money that was offered for the services. Not a bad figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. A nurse was needed for a little girl. The sort of unhealthy diagnosis didn't agree, but the person who gave the ad made it clear the child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including taking medication by the hour, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Julia wondered. She had experience in caring for babies. Thanks, Helen, her conclusion. The girl even enjoyed fiddling with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, knew how to feed them, change their clothes, keep them occupied. But here we were talking about a sick child, a seriously ill one by the looks of it. Could she do it? At least it was worth a try. Julia called the given number. She was answered by a pleasant male voice. The man asked her several questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children, and she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She wanted the job. Julia needed it like air. It was a chance to get out of a financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else to find such a salary? That's why the girl was worried about what if she was not taken. What then again to look for a place waitress? Labor for pennies. Cab brought Julia to the country cottage village. Elite neighborhood, high, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl met a woman, an au pair. As Julia found out later, and in fact a person who had everything on her plate: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, William, was always too busy. Businessmen in general have very little free time. William met the job applicants in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair with a slight square, an athletic figure. Yes, this man clearly paid attention to health and appearance. Juliet even cracked up at first. How to start a conversation with someone like this? To herself next to him, she suddenly seemed insignificant. Good morning. Warm. William smiled, and Julia's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open, and the kind William seemed at once like a man of his own. Hello. Julia smiled back. I'm here through an ad for you. It's very good. I'll tell you right away. I need a nurse for my daughter Sophia. She is in a very serious condition now, so it's not for everyone. She's being monitored by the paramedics. They're here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sophia, but how can I tell you? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I wish there was someone else there for her. You know, a young girl like you, cheerful, who knows a lot of songs and fairy tales, who can cheer up a child, inspire him, come up with some interesting activity, in general, to brighten up her leisure time. Why? What's wrong with your girl? Julia just couldn't help but ask that question. Who would know? William lowered his eyes. His face grew darker in an instant, becoming anxious and tense. Sophia, it's been examined everywhere. No one could understand anything. It's like her body is destroying itself. No signs of autoimmune aggression. She's been getting tests all the time. They do, but she's fading and nothing helps her. Poor baby, Julia exclaimed. The doctors are doing what they can. I have the means, as you can see. But they are not all powerful, unfortunately. Anyway, Sophia needs more than just a nanny. We have Adriana, our favorite au pair. She will feed her, give her medications on time, and we don't just need a caregiver either. Sophia is supervised by nurses. They do all the necessary procedures. Sophia is needed soon. A friend, a person who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, it seems to me that you're young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have a kind look in your eye. You can empathize. That's good. Julia nodded. She wanted to see Sophia as soon as possible. If she needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia was sure to cheer up a girl who had such a serious illness. To brighten up the gray, everyday life of the little patient, we'll find a way to make her life more pleasant. If you're ready to get to work right now, William continued, let's start a trial period. Let's say 3 days, and then Sophia will decide. Of course, you will be paid for your time anyway. But do you agree? Yes, nodded Julia. Good, William asked. Then Adriana will introduce you to Sophia. And I'm off. Business. As the door shut behind William, Adriana, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly soft and cozy look, turned to Julia with a question. I used to talk to babies. Do you know what little kids are like? I have nephews, Julia nodded. Is that a good thing? Adriana shook her head. But Sophia is ours. She's an unusual child. I've already realized that. I guess Sophia hardly ever gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to get her interested in anything, but you have to. Sophia needs to be distracted from her pain, from her agony. And she needs to walk at least an hour a day. That's what the doctor said. I get it. Well, now let's go meet her. Julia followed Adriana up to the second floor and entered the nursery. It was a spacious princess room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls were racks of expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. A little farther away was a ball pool, and closer to the door was a bed. What kind of bed was it? A big, round one. Julia looked around curiously. She had never seen a room like this before. Was it all for one child? In the midst of this splendor, Julia did not immediately notice the little mistress of the room. The girl was lying in bed surrounded by large stuffed toys. There was a cat baton, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over his body, and a skinny pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost merged from the unhealthy color of her skin with the white bed linen. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the entrance with curiosity. Sophia raised herself up on her elbows, though it cost her great effort, and turned to Adriana. Who's that with you? The new rehabilitator. The difficult word came out of the little girl's mouth easily and habitually, and it felt unnatural. No, Bunny, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. Will you play dolls together? Sophia got a little excited. Would you like to? I smiled at Julia. The girl evoked sympathy and pity. I like to play dolls very much. That's good. Adriana's not available. Can't Daddy play at all? Adults have a lot to do, Julia shrugged. That's why they can be boring sometimes, Sophia suggested. And the conspirators smiled. Boring, agreed Julia. Sophia laughed quietly. Well, I can see you're going to be fine. Adriana looked genuinely happy. Did you have fun here? I'm going to make dinner. Oh, and Sophia, you remember the nurse is coming to see you today, right? I remember, the girl frowned. Again, IVs. But where to go? Sweet Adriana kissed the top of the girl's head and left the room. Julia was left alone with Sophia. Well, shall we play? The girl turned to her ward with a smile. You have so many beautiful toys here. I can't keep my eyes open. You'd better read to me, the girl asked. It seemed that the short conversation had taken the last of her strength. Sophia sank down on the pillows, pulled the blanket over her skinny body, although the room was warm. Good, Julia agreed. She was surprised and horrified by the weakness of this child of 7. They are also Azers, such as Larry, Julia's older nephew. He is just the same age as Sophia. But he can't even sit still for 5 minutes. He's always getting into things, figuring things out. If the boy was suddenly in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or going down the slide. Helen calls him the perpetual motion machine and Molly. Christina and Christina are not lagging behind her brother, although they are younger. Sophia is lying there, poor thing. What do you want to read about princesses? There's a book on the windowsill. Vera started to read it to me, but she doesn't have time to read it. It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures. But the story itself, it seemed Julia some kind of silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic. She herself as a child did not like such stories at all. And let's make up our own story about these princesses. As Julia I expected tired eyes, Sophia flashed interest. How to do it, she clarified. Very simple. I start, you continue. Sophia was engrossed in the lesson. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. She would ride in her racing car. Then the heroine would be kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by the prince. The girl's imagination was running wild, which seemed to surprise Sophia herself. Then Adriana entered the room. Seeing that Julia and Sophia were getting along, she was pleased. The woman brought a lunch of mashed soup and stewed vegetables. Sophia grumbled. I don't want it, she said. I don't want to eat at all. I don't want any of this. Adriana looked at Julia. The woman was clearly waiting for her help. Let me feed you. Julia turned to Sophia. Each spoonful. Another princess adventure. I'll make them up as I go along. Can you imagine the stories I'll have to tell you? What do you think will finish your food or my fantasy first? It worked. The food ended faster than Julia's fantasy, but Sophia demanded more story. Adriana splayed out her hands in surprise, smiled, and walked out. Soon a nurse, Sophia, entered the nursery. Immediately on the gloomy one. She was almost asleep by now. Lunch and the story had tired her out. But it was time for treatments. IVs. Hopelessly asked the girl to the nurse. She nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt. You sleep later and we'll have tea. Adriana pulled Julia by the sleeve. Aren't you needed here now? The au pair led Julia into the spacious kitchen. Smoking cups of coffee and a flavorful cake that looked like it had just come out of the oven were waiting on the table. You, Sophia, and I see you're getting along. The woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia. That's good. Sophia had kicked out the previous nanny, but he's taken to you right away. I've already called William and told him all about it. He's very pleased and excited. He told me to take good care of you. I'm glad too. Julia smiled. Sophia is just a pity. My nephews are so noisy, so cheerful. She is lying on the bed. She can't even play. She has nothing to play with. It's scary. That's what the doctors say. There's a chance. No prognosis. Adriana shook her head. They can't even diagnose anything. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. Sophia will be better now after the drip. Take her for a walk after her afternoon nap for a while. William, the girl's father. I get that. Where's her mom? On a business trip. She has a demanding job too, that's why she can't babysit. I wish, Adriana sighed. Is Betty ours? She's gone. It was a difficult labor. The doctors tried to save the baby and didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Helen, didn't complain to them about anything. She was worried about the baby. But that's how it turned out. The day after the birth, Betty had a high fever. Checkup, ICU, this and that. Her heart stopped. Poor thing had some kind of internal bleeding. It's a rare case. And then there was Sophia in the NICU. She was born prematurely. It was a tough time. That's a shame. That's a shame, Adriana agreed. Let me tell you the whole story. Looks like you're gonna be here for a while. So you should know. William grew up in a well-to-do, close-knit family. A loving mom and dad, caring, attentive grandparents, a room of his own. Trips to the seaside every summer, birthdays, friends. William had a happy childhood, an equally happy youth. He graduated from high school with a gold medal. Thanks in large part to parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired William the best tutors. And foreign languages, and the boy studied in foreign camps and rest, and education at once. Vouchers to such places were not cheap, and it was not easy to get them. But what can't you do for the sake of your favorite son, especially if he is so desirable and long-awaited? William had rather old parents. They did not get a child for many years. The couple resigned, was with such a fate. But then, when there was no hope left, life suddenly threw a surprise gave the couple an heir. Needless to say, all of his mother's and father's attention from then on belonged undividedly to William. William was never shy of his parents. Yes, he saw his mother and father much older than the relatives of his classmates. But the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them, because William's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the head doctor of the regional hospital. Everyone knew them, everyone respected them. It never occurred to William to be ashamed of his family. William grew up. His parents were rapidly becoming obsolete, giving up. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father died. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and all. William then, for the first time, felt like an adult. You bet, because he, a student, had to get into the affairs of the company, which his parents left the guy by inheritance. It was William, a teenager, who was interested in his father's business. He knew a lot, even had the right to sign. And yet still, at first, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager of the board, a longtime friend of his departed parent. Because William needed to study and support his mother, who had given up a lot after the death of her spouse. 3 years passed. William had just gotten his degree, just taken over his father's company, just starting to gain momentum. And then there's another blow. Mom this time. The kid was all alone. William felt miserable and lonely in his parents' big house. At least Adriana, the au pair and almost a member of the family, was there. She had known William as a baby and treated him as her son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the young man, who had lost both his parents one after the other. It was hard on him. Adriana shook her head. Just a boy, but also. Work had pulled him through then. He had to decide something, to go somewhere, to hold meetings, to make contracts, and so on. That's what saved him back then. Time passed. William went from a young, inexperienced guy to a smart guy. A grip on the man, a talented businessman. Adriana rejoiced, looking at her ward. He grew older, stronger, more confident. The au pair wanted William to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then her heart would be at peace. Adriana was calm. Only he had no one in particular. Adriana said. No, there were some girls hanging around William. He's a good-looking guy, wealthy. They're always on the prowl. But I met with one of them, and I didn't see anything wrong with the other. I didn't like them as counselors. And I didn't like them either. It seemed like they only wanted money from him. He's got a tail on his head. And then Betty showed up. William met Betty literally on the street. She was walking down the sidewalk in a hurry. Turns out she was going to a job interview at William's firm. Betty had recently been downsized. The factory where she had worked for several years, after the institute as an accountant, had suddenly closed. So Betty was looking for a new position, and William went out for a walk to clear his head. He even had a goal to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And that's when fate knocked the young people head-on, literally. Helen jumped out of the corner too quickly and ran into the unsuspecting William. It was like something out of a romantic music video. The bag slipped off Betty's shoulder and the contents scattered on the pavement. William and Betty rushed to pick it up. Did the girl harbor words of apology? William assured her it was okay and admired the girl's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people sorted out the bag and the things that had spilled out of it, they rose synchronously and smiled at each other. Well, William, as a man, made the first step, learned the name of the beautiful stranger, and then introduced himself. They walked leisurely and talked and got acquainted. When William found out that Betty was rushing to his office, he asked and immediately realized that this beautiful girl was his destiny. And it was not by chance that they met in such an interesting way. Rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office, it was more romantic, more interesting, more enjoyable. All in all, a real romance was brewing. Adriana had never seen William so happy. Betty turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She and Adriana, and importantly, quickly found a common language. Sweet, sweet girl. And for what? And only such a fate. Sadly shook her head Adriana. A couple of years after their acquaintance, William and Betty got married. It was a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. There was love, mutual understanding, and respect between the couple. I am sure that her heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved. After all, Vanya, his wonderful, beautiful wife. Here with children, both decided not to hurry. Adriana continued the story. It was their common decision, as if they felt something. They traveled, worked, met with friends. And I, the fool, all in the old man's way. I advised them not to wait too long. I wanted to nurse their baby. But William and Betty lived on their own for 5 years after they were married. Were they happy together? No, they wanted kids, but not right away later while they were happy with everything. And then the news of Betty's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but the whole household welcomed it with joy. Well, then it was time, Betty summarized. The baby had decided he'd had enough of waiting. Thank God. Adriana threw up her hands. I think you're having a boy. You're very beautiful, Betty. Girls take away their mother's beauty during pregnancy. But the au pair was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Betty was expecting a girl. A big, strong one. They showed me a picture of her. They take pictures of a baby in the womb now. And when I looked at it, it looked just like Betty. That's how our Sophia was born, just like her mommy. Sophia. It was Betty who chose the name for her daughter. William and Adriana didn't mind. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy didn't go too easily. At first, Betty was suffering from toxicosis. Then it seemed to subside, but it was replaced by other problems such as high blood pressure and swelling. The child was developing well, but the mother was suffering, melting before her eyes, refusing to eat, lying down a lot. The usually energetic Betty lacked the strength even to go downstairs. Adriana carried her food directly to her bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Betty, helped her in any way she could, and assured her that everything would go away after her daughter was born. Children aren't easy for women, Adriana sighed. Pregnancy had taken its toll on Betty. Who's to say? Julia shrugged, remembering her sister. Both of them had gotten babies relatively easily. Anyway, Betty went into labor much earlier than she should have. The whole pregnancy was threatened, so fortunately, the mother-to-be was in the hospital under the supervision of doctors at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but failed. Sophia was born prematurely. Weak, she did not scream. She was not placed on Alina's chest, not even shown to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months, things are different. Sophia was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. The fight for her life began, and Betty and Lena seemed to be fine at first. Well, tired, of course, after childbirth. Well, anxious. She couldn't find a place for her daughter. It's all understandable, all explainable, and natural. The doctors examined the woman in labor, found no abnormalities, and sent her to the ward. Afterwards, serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. William and I were all worried about the girl. Adriana almost cried. It was obvious that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it all. They thought that the little girl would not survive. She was born too early. She was very weak. And then, when William received a call from the hospital in the morning and was told that his wife had died of internal bleeding, he could not believe his ears. It seemed to him that it was Sophia. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. But no, Sophia had made it. Stronger was the girl. Betty, on the other hand, was not. William, then the gray one, walked around, didn't sleep or eat for months. I thought he was going to die too, but he went away. I had to work. I had to pull Sotnikova through. To be perfectly honest, he didn't treat his daughter well at first. Blamed her for what happened to Lena. He knew it was wrong. But he couldn't help it. He was angry with her, that's all. Sophia was discharged home. They hired a nanny for her. Someone had to look after the baby. Adriana was too old for that, but she enjoyed playing. Sophia took her around the yard in her stroller and talked to her a lot. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she needed. My father was not capable of that at that time. She is like a granddaughter to me, smiled the au pair. I accepted her immediately. But William, he long shunned the child, bought for her everything necessary, and sometimes went for a walk with her. And that was if I made him. He didn't take the initiative himself. And then one day Sophia got sick. The temperature was high. Nothing helped. She was throwing up. It was the flu. It plagued a lot of people back then. And the little ones took it especially hard. But anyway, Sophia went to the hospital again. The doctors didn't give any prognosis. And that's when William came to his senses, gave up everything. He sat by his daughter's bedside singing songs and singing, telling poems, rocking her in his arms, and Sophia. It was as if she felt her father's care. She was on the mend immediately. Our little girl was discharged, and William became a real father, loving and caring. Life went on as usual. William worked a lot, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Sophia grew up, pleased her father and Adriana with her excellent health and rare intelligence, and everything seemed to be fine. But Adriana was worried that William was all alone. It seemed to her that there would be no happiness for him until he met a woman. Only now it was a very difficult task. Chosen by William, she had to love and accept Sophia. Otherwise, a union was out of the question. Well, God heard my prayers, Adriana smiled. And William had Lucy, the beautiful Lucy. I can't take my eyes off her. She's smart too. She's got a baby herself, a little girl a little younger than Sophia. It's a great family. Lucy got a job with William, and it all started at a corporate party. So, it's the usual story. Lucy was very good to Sophia. She often took her and her youngest daughter somewhere to an amusement park or to the movies. Sophia loved both Lucy and her little half-sister Nancy. She was truly happy. William and Lucy got married and started living together. Then Sophia started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, lack of appetite. Examination in the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with famous professors, all this did not give any result. Doctors could not diagnose the girl was melting before their eyes. The first year, she was still on her feet. Adriana almost cried again. It was obvious that her heart was truly hurting for the little girl. After New Year's Eve, she had gotten very ill, and now she was so afraid for her. And it is not clear what kind of illness attacked our little girl. Lucy and her daughter temporarily moved into her own apartment. Just Nancy went to the garden to carry infections from there, and for Sophia, all this was extremely dangerous. So Lucy and William made that decision. And it comes from Lucy a lot, every day almost. She's good, Sophia is fair. They bring her goodies. They bring Nancy too, sometimes, when she's not sick. When she started kindergarten, it started. Sick day after sick day. So they have a wife with one child separately, and a husband with their eldest daughter separately. That's the family. Well, what can I do? That's the situation. It's a strange situation, Julia said. She was shocked by the story of William and Sophia. You could make a TV series. Well, that's just the way it is. The old woman waved her hands. Sophia, I can see that you get along, and that's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you. The days went by. Julia now lived in the room next to Sophia's nursery, but the girl often asked the nanny to stay overnight in her bedroom. Sophia had a very comfortable sofa there. Julia lay down on it. They talked before going to bed, holding hands. Julia saw Sophia. It was very important. The girl clearly lacked attention, even though there were many adults around her. William was a very caring and anxious father and a pleasant person to be around. They often had conversations about Sophia. The man always listened attentively to Julia, did not interrupt or argue, and asked the right questions. Julia also got to know Lucy. Adriana was right. Indeed, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, a real queen. But when Lucy interacted with Sophia, when she was adjusting the blanket on the girl, she smiled and stroked the little girl's head. Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was faking it. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details. The cold glint of her eyes, the squeamish movement of her lips, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day Julia had a strange dream. The girl found herself in some room stripped wallpaper, creaking, twigs, floors. She sat on a stool by a dark window, through which nothing was visible, and realized that she was asleep. She wanted to wake up, but for some reason she couldn't. And then Julia did not even realize where she had come from. Betty appeared in front of her as if out of thin air. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sophia's mother in pictures. Betty smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, illogical voice. "Watch out for Lucy. She's trouble. She's dangerous. Betty vanished into thin air, and Julia had so many questions she wanted to ask her. How to keep an eye on her on what? What is she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, as if she'd flown into her body, fallen into it. It felt strange. Betty's words were still echoing in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which was little more than a dream, was more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream wouldn't let go. The next day Lucy was gone, and Julia waited for her. She knew for a fact that this woman was involved in something bad. Lucy is somehow hurting this family and doesn't like Sophia. She doesn't sympathize with the girl. She just pretends to care. And how come the others don't notice this? Even the experienced, long-lived Adriana. Lucy showed up the next day, beautiful as always, brightly made up languid. First thing she did was go up to Sophia to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. Sophia is thirsty, Lucy said, looking at Adriana. Let me make her some cocoa. Come on, I fussed, the au pair. No, I can manage. I feel like it. I want to do something for her. You're so thoughtful. Julia was silent. She was watching Lucy like Betty had asked her to in the dream. For some reason it felt like this was the big moment. It was as if Betty was there, telling her to be vigilant. Adriana was tending to the dough. Julia pretended to look out the window, but she was watching Lucy. And then there was Tanya. The woman deftly pulled a small vial out of her sleeve, dripped a few drops from there into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Only a couple seconds, a few deft movements, but Julia saw everything. The drink for the princess is ready. Lucy smiled. Julia, give me her favorite cup, please. Julia obeyed. She silently watched as Lucy poured what felt like a mug's Sophia glasses, with the image of characters of the girl's favorite cartoon. And I realized Sophia shouldn't drink it. She shouldn't. She must act. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Lucy, who dropped the cup from her hands. The glass fell and shattered. What spilled out onto the floor? I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy. Julia fussed, grabbed a rag, started wiping, undoing the puddle, picking up the shards. It's okay, I'll do more. In the voice of Lucy sounded poorly concealed irritation. Julia could not do it a second time. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept the fact that Sophia would get the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Lucy and Adriana were at Sophia's place, Julia squeezed the rag she used to wipe the cocoa into an empty tomato paste jar. She was going to take the liquid to be analyzed today. And needed to know exactly what Lucy put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins. Then there was no point in panicking. But something told the girl it wasn't. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. When Julia saw the statement, she was horrified. The drink contained a deadly poison, causing symptoms similar to those of Sophia. So the girl's weakness was due to her stepmother systematically poisoning her. Just like in a fairy tale, Julia didn't know who to turn to with her news. Adriana, what can she do? William, he wouldn't believe her. What to do? Lucy can't be allowed near the girl anymore. She wants to send her to the grave, and she's almost succeeded. And yet Julia has the courage to talk to William. She told him everything about her terrible dream, about the cocoa, and about the examination. Julia was afraid that he would yell at her, call her out, kick her out, or what's more, accuse her of wanting to hurt his daughter. You know, William said, looking at Julia, I would. I'd probably fire you immediately after saying that. It's very strange, you have to admit. But just yesterday, I had an unusual dream too. Betty, she asked me to trust you just to trust you, nothing more. Why don't you just keep this to yourself and take a vacation? I need to sort this out. Adriana will call you when you can go back to work. Julia spent those few days on pins and needles. She didn't know what was going on at William's house, and she was worried about Sophia, who had already become attached to her. But William had said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Adriana called Julia when she saw her name on the screen. Worried about what she would be told, how did it go? Come on over. All Adriana could do was extort. We're in the middle of something. Come over soon. Sophia misses you. Very much. Julia didn't have to beg long. Half an hour later, she was already at William's house. The owner himself opened the door, still as calm and unruffled as ever. His appearance made it hard to guess what had happened. "I want to thank you." The man finally allowed himself to smile. "You were right, Lucy. She really wanted to. I'm afraid to say it out loud. Sophia wanted to poison that bastard. Adriana didn't bother. That's a lot to think about. I already trusted her." The story turned out to be banal and old as the world stick. Lucy was not going to put up with a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's favorite daughter. She wanted her own daughter Nancy to be the sole heir to William's entire fortune. Well, first she herself, of course. Lucy had once studied to be a pharmacist. However, she never worked a day in her profession, preferring to live off rich admirers. Nature generously gave her beauty, so that the opportunities for such an existence the woman had. Received in college knowledge was enough to think of a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the other world. A poison that is difficult to detect in blood, tissue unless specifically looked for. Lucy poured the toxic substance into the food she cooked for Sophia. And the girl weakened, slowly fading away. There was nothing left to do. It doesn't make sense. Unbelievable. Everything Adriana couldn't calm down. Julia understood her. Indeed, Lucy's act was monstrous. How could she do that to a defenseless child? Sophia trusted her, loved her. So William installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. It turned out that Lucy was putting poison in Sophia's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself, and sometimes she managed to drip from a vial into the food, probably cooked in it. I used my own hands to take it to Sophia, the poison. Anyway, Lucy was caught red-handed. She was now under investigation. Nancy had been taken by her father, a man who had wanted to communicate with the child for a long time, but was prevented from doing so because he was too poor to do so, too unworthy. "Sophia, and everything will be fine," Adriana assured her. The child was not to blame for what his mother wanted to create. "And Sophia, how is she?" "Sophia is fine." There was a ringing voice from behind her. Julia turned around and met Sophia's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she had the strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. The doctors said she would recover quickly. "Julia." James walked slowly along the shelves of the children's store. It was a section for girls, so it seemed to both of them as if they were in the realm of pink and purple. Dolls, baby cosmetics, soft toys. It was mind-boggling. When I was in Europe, a guy bought his nephew a voice-activated robot. This is the thing. Maybe Sophia would like something like that. She's a girl, reminds me of Julia, and she definitely wants a cartoon character doll. We should try to find one. Maybe next birthday she won't want toys at all. Kids grow up so fast. It's amazing. We'll soon see for ourselves. James put his hand on Julia's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately with a still weak but tangible kick. A year ago, right after Sophia had been rescued from her evil stepmother, Julia had been in for another surprise. She continued to live close to Sophia. Sophia was recovering quickly, mastering active games, asking to take her for walks all over the city. The girl was still very attached to Julia, and that one still needed a job, and Julia had gotten used to everyone. To the girl Adriana, even William did not want to part with them. The adults initially decided not to tell Sophia the truth about what had happened to her. It was too scary a story, but the sensible girl managed to put two and two together, listened to something, thought of something. The story itself did not have a strong, destructive effect on her, as adults feared. Sophia took everything quite calmly. Everything is just like in fairy tales. The girl shrugged her shoulders. The little girl was coming back to life. In September, she went to school with her peers. And Julia was finally able to recover at the university, chose a correspondence department, because she had to not only study, but also work. However, her work was more like living in a family with her relatives. Sweet, cheerful Sophia, kind, wise Vera Petrovna, always busy, but polite and attentive William. With these people, Julia was cozy, warm, and comfortable. They took her in still and were very grateful to her for her rescue. Sophia, it is scary to think what could have happened if not for that terrible dream. They discussed this unusual event. First, Betty had dreamed about Julia, then about William. Adriana was sure Betty had broken through time and worlds to save her daughter. William only shook his head and did not give his opinion. And Julia, she didn't know what to think. Perhaps Lucy had aroused her suspicions at once. After all, she had not liked Sophia's stepmother at first sight. More likely, Julia was running through the thoughts in her head. It is possible that they were transformed into unusual dreams. Except that William also dreamed Betty and asked him to believe. Julia found it more difficult to explain. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sophia was doing her homework. Adriana was doing chores around the house. Julia had to drive to the university to bring some documents to the dean's office. Suddenly, James stepped toward her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes from the Chantenou hair. And him? He looked happy and confused, smiling, looking at Julia as if there was no one more important to him in this world. "At last I found you," he said, and without delay he pressed her against him. Julia did not understand anything, but she did not resist. She pressed against her lover, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about James's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. James simply dropped his phone into the ocean during a walk on a steamer. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably. Julia was not registered in social networks, so he simply could not contact her. No way. James wrote letters, like in the good old days of letters and telegrams. But Julia had moved in with William and was hardly ever home. So the letters piled up in the mailbox and then for some reason disappeared. Julia remembered this moment. One day she came home and saw that the mailbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box and taken the letters for some reason. Maybe the kids. Maybe a nosy neighbor. In short, Julia hadn't heard from James, so she assumed he'd forgotten about her. Started a new life, betrayed her. I couldn't just drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. Without you, without news of you, it was unbearable. But I knew I would have to wait, and then financially I would be able to provide for us for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I had no idea. You're in some kind of dire straits. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I didn't know you'd been laid off. It's been so hard on you. That's it. Just an unfortunate set of circumstances. Julia was glad that her feelings and James' feelings were real. That there was no betrayal or deception in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. James now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, gigs, tours, opportunities to take his music to people who were ready to accept it. And money? Money, of course. James was even able to buy an apartment for the two of them. It was in the middle of a renovation. James and Julia got married. They were already expecting a child. Julia felt happy and loved. She no longer worked for William. And a grown-up Sophia didn't need a 24-hour nanny to take care of her. But they all remained friends. And right now, Julia and James were picking out a 9th birthday present for Sophia that might not have been.